I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Nashua City Planning Board for June 7th, 2018. Mr. Secretary, can you call the roll?
Yes. Mayor Donches, Mike Peterson, Scott Leclaire,
Here.
Adam Varley, Ed Weber, here. Alderman David Tenza. Here. Alderman Marianne Mazzella Gola. Steve Dukraine,
Present.
Dan Kelly, David Robbins,
Present.
Jerry Rapucci,
Here.
Maggie Harper.
Here.
Okay. So we have in front of us minutes from the May 17, 2018 Planning Board meeting. Has anybody had a chance to take a look at them and make a motion?
Marianne voting.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Or Maggie.
Maggie,
Maggie
rather,
will
sorry.
be-
Put
will
it
be
down, I
voting.
wanted to make sure
Missing
so it's
one,
heard.
Thank you.
one active member, so you will be voting, yeah. Anybody in the minutes?
Move acceptance.
Okay, so we have a motion to accept the May 17th minutes as written. Second?
No, I didn't second, no. Let's go. Discussion. Yeah.
Second from Mr. Rapucci, discussion?
I wasn't present as indicated.
Okay, so it needs to be amended.
Yep.
Do you want to amend that motion, Dave? Take Steve off of it?
So moved.
All right, so have a second on that amendment. Second by Mr. Rapucci. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Abstentions? Got two. Ed? Okay. All right, communications.
Hi, good evening.
Thanks.
In your folder this evening, I'll quickly go through the items that are in there. The first one is actually from Mr. Rapucci. It's New Hampshire Town and City Demystifying Impact Fees. Next up is there's going to be on June 11th, a regional roundtable discussion for planning board at NRPC. It's at 6:30. If you're interested in attending, you can go onto their website, and it is free.
Okay.
Next, you have an email from Ken Dufour regarding the McDonald's case. And there is an email regarding the stormwater ordinance that we will be talking about as other business number 2. And then finally, there is a preliminary agenda to determine items of regional impact. That's it.
All right, thanks. Report of Chairman, Committee, and Liaison. Ed, anything?
Nothing.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and read the procedure of the meeting now. So the meeting and hearing is going to go as follows. After each legal notice of conditional special use permit, site plan, or subdivision is read by me, the board will determine if its application is complete and ready to take jurisdiction. If so, then the public hearing will begin at that time, and the applicant will be given time to present an overview and description of their project. They'll speak to whether or not they agree with the recommended staff stipulations, and the board will have time to ask relevant follow-up questions of the applicant or staff. I'll then ask for testimony from the audience. I'll first ask if there's anybody wishing to speak or in opposition or concern to the plan, and they can come forward to the microphone, state your name and address, and speak. This is a time for you to express your concerns or questions you may have regarding the plan. Next, I'll ask for testimony for anyone wishing to speak in favor of the plan. After that, the applicant will be given a rebuttal period in which they can speak about the concerns raised by public testimony. If so needed, I will allow and ask for one public member to respond only to those items brought forth during the rebuttal period. After that is completed, the public hearing will end and the board will resume the public meeting, at which time the board will deliberate and vote on the application before us. I'd ask that both sides keep their remarks to the subject at hand and we don't repeat anything that has already been said. We want to be fair to everybody and make the best possible decision based on the testimony presented and considering all applicable approval criteria established in the Nashua revised ordinances. Thank you for your interest and attention. I'd ask if you have a cell phone that you just turn it off or put it on vibrate at this time. All right, thanks. So old business conditional special use permits, there are none. Old business subdivision plans, there are none. Old business site plan, case number 1, Janice M. and James R. French, owners, McDonald's applicant. An application and acceptance of a proposed site plan amendment to NR 1893 to remove the existing drive-through and construct a proposed side-by-side drive-through and modify the existing parking layout. Property is located at 3 Northeastern Boulevard. It's zoned HB Highway, and it's in Ward 6. This application was tabled from our May 17th, 2018 meeting. So I'd ask the board at this time, does anybody want to take that off the table and make a motion?
I will. I make a motion, we take it off the table and we open the public hearing.
All right, so Mr. Rapucci has a motion to pull the application from the table and reopen the public hearing. Do you have a second on that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Weber. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Motion passes. So do we have the applicant here tonight to represent? Thanks.
For the record, my name is Brandon Barry. I'm here with Bowler Engineering. We are located at 352 Turnpike Road in Southborough, Massachusetts. It's nice to see everyone again. We appreciate you having us back and taking this matter off the table. As discussed, we're here to talk about the McDonald's at 3 Northeastern Boulevard and our application to amend the existing site plan approval for the site to construct some improvements to their drive-through building and ADA features on the site. It's been about a month since we were here before you again. So I'd like to just quickly make sure everyone's familiar with our existing site plan that we had put before you beforehand, go over some of the concerns you had, and then I'll go into the revisions we had. So this is our existing plan up on the screen now. Featured McDonald's side-by-side drive-through with 2 entrance lanes, 2 order points, and a single lane for pickup and payment. We were also looking to increase or revitalize the building to bring it in line with McDonald's current branding standards, and also reconstruct the accessible spaces to bring those in line with current ADA regulations and remove any barriers that existed. As part of this, we pulled the pavement in about 18 feet off the eastern property line, increasing our buffer to the nursing home use and also providing about 5,500 square feet of green space, which we felt was a huge improvement over the site. And additionally, in response to some comments we received, we were looking to replace the existing stockade fence with a PVC vinyl fence to increase our screening. At our hearing about a month ago, the board raised some concerns about access to the parking spaces, the head-in parking spaces we had along the building, specifically the potential for those spaces to be blocked by 2 lanes of drive-through traffic during peak hours. Additionally, there was concern about escape lanes through the drive-through, as we had a hard island on the northern edge of the drive-through that would restrict travel or cars to staying in the drive-through until they made it to the western side of the building. So now that I've kind of refamiliarized everyone with what we had presented to you before, here before you is the revised plan that we have come up with. We took your comments and reviewed them with McDonald's and tried to come up with something that we thought both met their operational and business needs while also trying to address your comments and show that McDonald's would like to be a good neighbor. So the most substantial change you're going to see on this plan is that we've removed one of the drive-through lanes. So now there's only a single drive-through lane entering, not 2. This will bring this in line with McDonald's current, a more prototypical drive-through that they would use with the 1 entrance and 2 order points. Also make it very similar to the Daniel Webster Highway location that the board had saw about a year ago, and as far as we know, has been functioning as intended for McDonald's for the past year. And also, we have shifted our parking spaces and remove one of them along the building to provide increased separation from the drive-through entrance to those parking spaces to avoid any potential queuing issues. But as we discussed at the last meeting, we don't really anticipate any queuing backing up beyond the crosswalk we have there at the drive-through entrance. The intent of this drive-through is to really move the on-site queuing from the entrance to the site to the order point to beyond the order point. By having the 2 orders, it's harder for the drive-through to get clogged down by a larger order, and free flow of traffic can still move through a secondary lane when something like that happens. Also, based off some comments from staff, and I believe a suggestion that was made by the board at the last hearing, the 3 spaces closest to the drive-through entrance are now going to be designated as employee-only spaces. What this will accomplish is that there will be less turnover in those spaces, and employees will be parking there for about 6 to 8 hours, depending on their shift and leaving. So those spaces won't be as traveled in. Additionally, the times where there could potentially be queuing behind those spaces would be peak hours, and the restaurant is going to have their employees come in before the peak and then leave after, so those spaces really have a very low likelihood of being blocked should the drive-through queue back to that point. We did keep our ADA spaces against the building. Just looking at it, we believe it's the best practice to have those in the closest location so that our accessible customers aren't traveling across a drive aisle or drive-through lane and have quick, easy, convenient access to them. We think it's the optimal location both from a code standpoint and just for an access and accommodating those type of customers. Lastly, a change that we have made in the event of emergency, we have removed one of the hard islands in the middle of the drive-through at the north and created a striped area so that cars would have the ability to access that exit the drive-through lane in the event of an emergency. This escape lane is in, again, a similar location to where we had striped one out at our Daniel Webster location. So we believe this is in line with something that the board has seen and, as we said, is functioning correctly today. Based off that, those summarize the changes that we've made, and I believe the comments and concerns that the board had raised at our last hearing. As I mentioned, we worked this over with McDonald's and really think we've come up with a great plan that they're on board with. We think we've addressed your comments and tried to really show our willingness to work with the city on this while working in some of the constraints we have, both from a operations standpoint and the existing site layout. And we'd welcome any questions or comments you may have at this time.
Great, thanks. Can you talk a little bit about the ADA consultant that it looks like you enlisted as well?
Yep, so that is Adam Schwach from Quest Design Services. McDonald's, as I mentioned before, or if I didn't, McDonald's very serious about their ADA compliance at their sites. As part of this large remodel program they're going through, that is really at the forefront of what they're doing. Drive-through is almost secondary to making sure that they're ADA compliant. So they've hired the services from Quest Design Services to review all of our plans before we go to construction, and then also after construction, they'll come out to all of their sites to ensure everything was constructed to code. So they're kind of our ADA correspondent that we work with to kind of make sure that we're designing correctly. So in reviewing with him, we had asked him, if he saw any potential barriers in the ADA regulations or codes that would restrict us from putting spaces with potential for a drive-through to queue behind them, or how he felt about relocating the spaces to another part of the site. And as he kind of says in his letter, having them at the building is the optimal location to avoid accessible customers traveling across drive aisles, drive-through lanes, or other areas, even if they are striped.
Okay, thanks. Questions for the board? Mr. Robbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the work you've done on this and coming back. A couple of questions. If I were to enter in my vehicle from Northeastern Boulevard, can you sort of take us through, and it's a little hard to see that scale, but take us through the difference in going through the drive-through from what you proposed last month and what you're proposing now? What are the key differences?
Really, access from Northeast Boulevard is relatively unchanged. What you'll see is, you would turn in from the right on Northeast Boulevard, you would enter into the site, travel along these parking spaces. These have shifted out about 10 feet further off the building. So in our last layout, there would be kind of 2 potential lanes here, about 22 feet of space that you could travel, plus our 18-foot drive aisle. So we had a very wide open area of pavement. So really, access to the drive-through is unchanged. The only difference is where there was 2 potential queuing lanes, about where my mouse is hovering right here, we've now just shrunk it down to 1. What we think, some of the concerns we had heard was if there was, excessive queuing on the site blocking those spaces, it wouldn't just be 1 car I needed to wait to let me back out, it would be 2. So in this instance, there isn't that possibility for there to be 2 lanes of traffic behind our spaces, and that's really the biggest change to the drive-through layout, and there's really not much difference in the access. I'll just flip back to the last layout so you can kind of see that there. So again, under our previous layout, I would turn in here, come up through the site, travel along the building, and you can see it's more open in this area, so there could be some confusion, or if there is blocking, more stacking through here and enter in. So access to the drive-through and your circulation pattern is unchanged. We've just shrunk the drive-through entrance width to just have 1 lane of traffic to better put people in there and reduce the double stack queuing that we heard the board was concerned about.
All right, now, if a car goes through either of the two order points,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have a new cutout
Yep.
that's striped that would not, yeah, right up at the top, which would
Right.
allow somebody to get out if something came up. In other words, and in effect, an escape point as opposed to an escape lane. Okay, and then somebody would come out, and if they needed to, when they came around, they could also get out on an escape lane and come around.
Yep. So there, at the last hearing, it seemed like a concern was throughout this whole area, in this middle section, we had a hard curved landscape island, so there wouldn't have been a way to exit through here. So if there was a car broken down somewhere, or a fire, or, you know, some of the concerns the board brought up, cars would have to come all the way around to here to exit. This whole area through here is just pavement striping, so there is no physical barrier after where this green space ends. So, you know, now cars in this area have fine access through the drive, you know, the pickup lane here, they have access. So now, if there's a fire, this car has a quicker and easier way to get out, which was our intent. You know, we had heard some of the concerns, and that seemed like the most viable location to provide an escape at an earlier point to provide that valve for people to leave.
Okay, well, I again, thank you for that. I'd like to, if I may, Mr. Chair, a couple more questions.
Sure.
Thank you very much. I was at McDonald's between about 11 and 11:40 today, just wandering around, having a cup of coffee. And I stood out in front and looked at the drive-through process. And for the first 10 or 15 minutes I was there, it was pretty, it was not terribly busy, and then cars started to come through. And I would guess that in the 20 or so minutes that I was standing there, maybe 25 cars came through, maybe 30, let's say 30. Two of the cars came through. One of them couldn't figure out what they wanted to do to exit, and they hit the curb with the left-hand door as they were, a left-hand wheel as they were coming around. And then the driver took a right and exited onto Northeastern Boulevard. And then about 5 minutes later, a car came around and took a right and exited onto Northeastern Boulevard. And the signage is there: no right turn, one way, exit this way. I was very surprised. I was expecting, almost expecting that there might be an accident there with people coming in, because there are a couple of people coming in. All of this to say, how sure are you that your signage, whatever it is going to work in this, as far as parking, as far as entry, exiting? It still is a pretty complex situation, and it appeared to me, as a layperson, that the people who were making the turns there really, they didn't know what they were supposed to do. I think my sense is, I may be wrong, that they were confused. It wasn't necessarily a malicious, I'm going to do this by gosh.
Yep.
So I guess I'm a little bit concerned that folks who are not familiar are going to be confused by this, and even more so with the new setup, which is a little bit more complex. But do you have any thoughts about that?
So I think relative to the right turning motion at the driveway, you can kind of see, and I'll zoom in so it becomes a little bit more clear. We have the existing conditions shown on this plan in red. So this is that turning point that you were mentioning, that you saw people taking a right. And you can see as I'm sitting here, this turn is, under existing, is pretty straight down. So it looks like a 90-degree right turn. You can see in this brown area, which is meant to represent, you know, some mulching and landscaping, we're now extending this out and then curving our driveway more to the right as we come in. So now standing here, again, I know signage can only tell somebody to do something and not force them to, but we will have, you know, new signage on either side: stop, do not enter. I believe we have a no right turn proposed here as well, but we've also changed the geometry here. So now you would have to pull a hairpin turn. So it's, I think, through the geometry we're proposing at that entrance, we're more, you know, creating a physical barrier and really making it so you would have to make a very non-typical turning motion to then go against traffic. So I think the changes we've made at the entrance from Northeast Boulevard will be an improvement and help address that concern that you witness on the site. And like I said, we will be doing new signage throughout, pavement striping with arrows indicating the turn of direction, and then traffic control devices everywhere we can. So that's really the best that we can do to try and control what the customers on the site are doing, and just provide the adequate signage, which I think we have done.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Weber?
Yeah, yes, thank you. I visited the Hudson and the DW. And what would you know the peak time for DW and what day?
I don't know offhand, but based off my experience with McDonald's, it's probably going to be between the 12 and 1 o'clock hour on a Saturday.
Okay. Saturday at 12:30, I was there a couple of weeks ago, and I found the DW highway to be very nice. There wasn't any problems. There only one time was there a problem, and it was because the person in the left lane or single.
This is the Daniel Webster site, just
Right.
so anyone else can know what we're talking about who's unfamiliar with it, so.
And what I found is there was only one car, at one point, there was cars backed up to that first parking space, only because that car didn't go to the second, which was empty. But there was at no time during that 45-minute span, there was not a problem. And unfortunately, I think on your current one that you have, you may end up having a problem only because of the cars on the left lane going in, backing up, and now they can't get to the right hand after that backs up, if they don't get there. There's no way to get to that second, unfortunately. Second thing, on the left turn that Mr. Robbins was talking about, I believe that, what would you think of putting a arrow on the people coming in, right next to that, right there?
Right here?
Putting an arrow on the pavement showing direction.
We would definitely be willing to add more pavement striping if the
Just
board
that
felt it
one.
would be
And
appropriate.
that really does, people look at that and they don't look at signs so much, but they'll look at arrows easier. I'm just recommending, I'm not saying that's what you have to do. My other thought was, and I talked about it last time, is McDonald's going to put in handicap access push bar so that the door opens up for a handicapped person at that closest entrance, that one there?
Yep, we're on board to do that, and we included that on the Daniel Webster site, I believe, probably at the recommendation of the board. So
Really?
that's something McDonald's would be open to doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have no other.
Other questions from the board? No? The only questions I have, and do you have the original staff report still? Do you have a copy of it originally? There's some waivers on there. I think that we went through all of them before, but I just want to make sure you're still okay with all the waivers. Maybe-
Our stance on our waivers have not changed, but
Yeah.
I'm definitely willing to go
Let's
through
just
them.
Go through them, yeah.
Yep.
The first one is existing condition plan. Second one is peak roofing.
Yep.
Third one, the stormwater report, that's still applicable. Fourth one, the landscaping plan, still applicable.
Yep.
And then fifth would be the lighting, sixth, traffic report.
Yep.
Okay.
Scott, I have one more question. just-
Mr. Weber? Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The last one was, I want to make sure that, because it isn't in here, up by the dumpster, there was, in that area right there. On your plans, are you showing the barriers that are around that? Because part of what you had originally, there was just gonna be one barrier there, right there going down.
Yep.
But not the other where you're at right now.
And I think as we had spoke last time, I think that was something that was omitted or left off our survey due to the condition it was in. And McDonald's is, just to reiterate, I think both your comments from last time, committed to constructing that guide rail to ensure it's protecting that culvert, and also cleaning that out so that it's functioning as
Okay, now
intended.
the barrier's gonna go all the way around, all the way to the stop, see where you stop?
Yep.
Right there? And actually, I would go all the way around because of the sidewalk that you have right there going north. That other sidewalk. It is close proximity to that pit and needs to have barrier all the way around if it's possible.
I don't believe that should be a problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I won't put it in as a stipulation when you're saying.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Dukran?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish we had the benefit of having this plan earlier, so we could have examined it a little more closely. So as I sit here and I compare the previous plan with the current plan, I'm wondering if really there is an improvement. I agree that making that entrance, direct entrance from Northeastern Boulevard by bending it more will discourage people from leaving and make it safer than it is today. And safer than the previous plan too, because in the previous plan it was essentially what it is today, that entrance. However, you know, we recognized the last time that the queuing, even from the double ordering lanes, will at times impact those cars that are parked up against the building. And it's a condition that exists today in several locations, out of McDonald's, out of drive-throughs and so on. And we also have, you know, where the parking is away from the building and people have to cross. And I see where your ADA expert has, you know, suggested that it's better to have the handicap spaces against the building. That's understandable. But going from two ordering queue lanes to one, I'm looking at your numbers. The previous plan says here, 170 feet on the rightmost lane of stacking, 202 feet of stacking for the left lane. And then the plan you have today says 180 feet of stacking. I'm thinking you were preparing for a lot of stacking when you came the last time. No, you're not. So what has changed, really?
That, it wasn't so much that we were preparing for it, it was just based off the definition of stacking in the bylaw, which is from the site entrance to the order point. We were listing both of them just to show the extensive amount of stacking we had. Now that we don't have the two lanes, we really can't take credit from the entrance in for both lanes, because it's, you know, as Mr. Weber had pointed out, there could be, you know, at this point, we only have one entrance into it. So there's really only one true stacking definition from the front of the site to the order point. So that's why we've changed kind of how we were presenting how much stacking we had. And it was less preparing for that much stacking and more just showing our stacking as it's defined in the bylaw.
And I get that now, but still, you know, there is an amount of stacking today. I'm sure it's on the Saturday peak hour like you described. I don't know what it is. I haven't been there to look at that. I know it's a pretty popular place, but I'm of a mind that the two lanes would have actually reduced the potential stacking that would block the ADA spaces. And I suggested the last time, if you make those first spaces closest to the ordering points, employee parking like it's done many places, that they're not open to generally the public, that's a good idea. Here, I think now that you're really setting up yourself to block those ADA spaces. So I don't think the plan is better, except for that entrance off Northeastern Boulevard. That's my opinion looking at these two plans side by side.
Can you confirm, though, the original plan essentially had two parallel,
Two parallel
So you-
stacking lanes.
so there's really like 3 lanes going through north to south on the plan north-south.
Yep, there's the
And now
third
it's
one on,
two.
now there's two. The third one that we were showing on the original plan is the escape lane, which is
Right.
also shown in the bylaw. So those were there just to kind of show compliance with the
Right.
town's codes.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for the applicant?
Just one backup
Ed?
follow.
Yeah.
Go back to your, the corrected view, and it might help. You might be able to, see where your pointed area, if you proceeded to push that back, I'm sorry, as I look at it, up there.
Up here?
If you proceeded that a little bit farther, it might be able to alleviate that congestion and still leave it the same striping distance, but cut off more of the sidewalk and allow a car to get around that, so you'd initially have a double stack. I'm not sure if that's the answer, just an idea.
Part of our thinking on how that island is extended down is, you had mentioned potentially this being blocked. We don't want there to be 2 lanes of stacking and someone to cut out and then cut in. And so, we need to provide some control so that people are funneling into the drive-through as intended.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah, if I remember right from last time, if you remove the parking spaces that are against the building, then you won't be in compliance with your parking requirement. You'd need a variance to reduce that. Am I right about that?
We would need a waiver if we did that.
Okay.
Our thought would be if the board wanted us to remove those spaces to alleviate any concerns, we would look to pick them back up in some of the green space that we're developing. We would essentially trade green space from our eastern property line to interior of the site. It's not preferred because, like we said, we think giving a better buffer to the nursing home uses is the preferred option for this site, but that's how we would look to address that, because this is also a parking numbers McDonald's comfortable with, and they don't want us reducing that, so.
So if that were to happen, then where would you put the handicap spaces? In the front where the standing spaces are for people waiting from the stack?
So our ideal preference is to leave them where they are.
I know, but-
We think it's the best location for them. If the board did feel strongly about the ADA spaces there, we would take that as a condition. So it's in our approval, but our preference is to keep them here for access, but we would move them to these 3 spaces here, and then connect them through this access walk. Like we said, they'd be crossing over a drive aisle. Most of our traffic is coming off Northeast Boulevard, so having those spaces at an easily accessible place for those people as they pull into the site, so they don't have to fully circulate around to park, again, is preferred, and having them next to the building is our preferred option. But if the board wanted us to remove all parking in that area, we would take moving the ADA spaces as a condition. We'd have to, since we'd be losing a space here and then the 3 here, we would be not just be putting 3 spaces in here, we'd be putting 4, because we'd be losing 1 more for the access aisle, but that would, we've discussed that with McDonald's in case the board feels strongly.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Ms. Harper?
Could you tell me approximately how many vehicles would fit from the ordering points back to the ADA spots?
So I have 14 total within the drive-through proper, so from this crosswalk to this window that they're picking up, I have space for 14. I believe I have 6 in this area, so I have 5 from the order points to the crosswalk, 5-foot crosswalk, 10 feet there, 3 spaces at 27, and then another 24. So really 5, 6, 7 spaces before my order points before we would impact the ADA spaces.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Robinson?
One last question. I just realized that I'd overlooked something. As I was wandering around the site today, I noticed that folks coming in on Northeastern Boulevard, going essentially west to east, take a left on Holiday Circle, and then take a right into there. Now, they have 2 options at that point, and correct me if I'm wrong, to get into the drive-through or park. They can either take an immediate right, circle around the building and come back into the drive-through, or they can go straight across, actually take a little bit of a left and go in there and go around and go in. I just realized, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if you're coming in from Holiday Circle now, you don't have that second option. You have to take a right. You have to circle, no matter where you're going on site. Is that correct?
Under our proposed plan, yes, so we would be removing kind of that decision, and then we're essentially creating one-way circulation around the site, where under our existing conditions, there's one way in some areas, but then there's also two ways in that perimeter parking. I would point out, sitting there during the dinner time tonight, I noticed a number of cars taking this right, which is technically not a motion that's allowed. So there is some confusion with the circulation on the site, because there's some aisles that are one way and some that are two, whereas under our proposed plan, everything is one-way circulation.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Other questions for the applicant? No? Okay. All right. Any questions for staff while we're still in the hearing? Okay, at this point in time, I'd ask if there's anybody wishing to speak in opposition to the plan? Seeing none, anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan? There's none, okay. At this point, I'm gonna close the public hearing and move into the public meeting. Thanks. So, we have a couple of changes to the plan. People have talked about it. Where do you wanna, go ahead, Jerry?
Yeah, as I said the last meeting, I don't see myself supporting a modification that puts parking spaces backing into the stack lane. I'm a little torn because adding the second drive-through ordering point will definitely only help any stacking problem. It wouldn't harm the stack. If all the same cars were going through one instead of two, they would obviously take longer. So it's definitely would be an improvement. But when you combine, and I went to several McDonald's too. I went to the one in South Nashua, which is really nice, but it's a lot bigger. And you don't have the traffic that's coming in from the other road and going around the building, merging in with the same stack that's coming off of Northeastern Boulevard. You don't have that in Nashua. You have it actually on the other side, because people can drive all the way around. When I say Nashua, I mean South Nashua. You can drive all the way around, but that's a huge area. Like a whole bunch of cars could stack into that other place and not cause any mayhem in the area. Also, they've put the double turnaround, they don't put the spaces against the building at all McDonald's. The one in Milford, for example, is more like the one here presently. There's no spaces against the building. The stack goes right along the side of the building as it goes up and through. And they have two windows there. So you have actually, you have a couple of lanes. You have the stack lane and you have the drive-by lane.
Yeah.
But you also have two sets of cars backing into the same location. The people that are parked on the right side are backing into that flow of traffic, as well as the people that are parked in the handicap places. It just, I understand they're trying to improve it and do the best they can with the site they have. I just think it's a formula for more problems than it fixes. I think it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea to have that, and I just can't support it. I think they made some efforts to change it, but it would be better served if we, I don't know if we can grant the waiver for parking. If we could, I would be willing to do that. If we remove those spaces, if it's a zoning requirement, though, I don't know if we can grant a zoning requirement. It would have to go back to the zoning board. It wouldn't.
It's fine, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would be willing to do that. I'd be willing to accommodate, use the space that's in the back that, I can't remember who said it last time, but it was very true. There's a lot of spaces back there that aren't really used. There's plenty of parking on the site. It's just right in that area. I'm inclined to say no. I think we need a plan Plus, it does improve the problem with people turning out onto Northeastern Boulevard because of that curve. But it's also complicating the entrance, because the entrance now is a straight 90-degree right into the drive-through lane. The new design, it's going to be, as you turn in, it's going to be further to the right because they have to swing the traffic out that 20 feet or whatever it is, because the drive-through lane now is 20 feet further that way. So I'm inclined to say no. Backing into the stack. I think of it I understand, that professionals that present before us are doing the best for their client. I get that. I'm not suggesting that Mr. Barry isn't being completely truthful and honest, but his job is to sell this to us. And that stack is gonna cause a problem when it's busy. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if that stacks out to Northeastern Boulevard. So that's where I'm at. I'm not really trying to convince anybody, but I do think that's the situation with it.
Ed?
Yeah, I've gone to Hudson many times, got grandkids, but I don't take them there all the time, sorry. And they have the double stacking. And like you said, and it's more congested, much more congested, just like this kind of, it's a different configuration. What?
I don't think they have parking against that.
They do.
They do.
They
Okay.
do, and they have the handicap parking just like this.
They do, okay.
But they have their people, they come in where we see on the top right-hand side, they actually have people coming in from where Sam's Club is, and they make that turn into the left side. But even with all of the people, and that's a very busy, really busy place, because they have them coming in off of Lowell Road, they have them coming in from Sam's Club, that area, or making that turn in. And yet, I've stayed there for 45 minutes also, because I wanted to see how they looked there. And not once did they impact the handicap. They did impact the first parking space, that they're gonna have employee parking. They did have that on occasion, but it never stopped that person from backing out and getting out and taking that road. So that never impacted. The one up in Daniel Webster, with even though it's bigger, they still have lots of people coming in. And on the left side, the one that's closest to the building, had to have 3 cars backed up before they would start impacting that. And the other one had to have 5 cars in it before it could impact. That's 8 cars stacked before it got into that first parking space. So that's probably 12 cars they would have before.
You're talking 8 cars stacked just in front of the ordering point.
Before they impact that first parking space. So that's a lot of cars, and I never saw, and that was peak time, that I never saw them having a problem with. And that only happened once in the whole peak time that it really backed up. And even the one in Hudson, it only happened that once, and then it just flowed right through. And the only time it backed up is, like I was saying, the person didn't come to the other one. So they really not. This one here at this location backs up now all the way, consistently backs all the way up to Northeast Boulevard consistently on peak times. So the dual is going to alleviate that problem. And they actually have people can't even get in sometimes into the site because of the problem. And so they're trying to eliminate that. And I have no problem with this design. I have no problem, because it never went back to the handicap parking ever, not even close, like I said. It never really did. Single will.
Jerry, do you have a concern with the handicap excessive crossing the traffic, though? I mean, you're kind of trading.
You are,
issues
but,
there, and
you know,
that's
I mean,
that's a
handicapped
tough
people
issue.
are as capable of crossing the street as anybody else, right? And what they're gonna be looking at is cars pulling away from the pickup window against that McDonald's, and cars that are going around the loop. That, so,
I hear you. Yeah,
This-
I'm concerned about handicap access to, like, in the winter across the drive aisle. I mean, the drive aisles are full of slush, they're full of, I mean,
no question,
it's not
if you
great.
were not, if you were not interfering with the stack,
Yeah.
the way they're doing it is optimal.
Yeah.
I don't question that.
Yeah.
I'm just, and something that Mr. Weber said, kind of like, he's observed that it goes all the way back to Northeastern Boulevard. I don't think that the two windows is going to improve that all that much if there's one stack lane. So I think that kind of indicates that the stack will interfere with those spaces
At times.
at times.
Times.
Right. The double ordering window will help, but it's still funneling into the same place, so it's not gonna be all that much relief. They don't get backed up at the ordering window. They get backed up at the pickup window. So, once that starts to back up, cars will be sitting there at the ordering window, waiting to merge into that merge. And then it's not helping the stack problem.
Why wouldn't that happen at the other locations, though? It does.
Well, you know, it's interesting, because I went to the South Nashua one, too, and I didn't see any problem there at all. And I went there like 3 or 4 times. But I didn't even see any cars stacking. I mean, it was maybe just 2 or 3 cars at a time, but I didn't see a problem down there. Because last time, Mr. Barry pointed out that McDonald's had the same design, so I went down to look at it. And also, the one I was thinking of wasn't the one on, near Sam's, it was the one on 102, when I said I don't think it has the
Yes. Right,
parking
right,
there.
right,
But I didn't realize you were talking about the Sam's one.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, I'm really not trying to convince anybody to agree with me. I just don't see myself supporting,
Yeah, no, I went
That
at
kind of
the,
stack.
I'm sorry.
Anybody else have comments on the plan for?
Yeah,
Steve?
I would just want to reiterate what I observed, and if you have the old plan, please look at it.
Yeah.
So the old plan, Mr. Barry did put renditions of the vehicles in the ordering area, and today's plan doesn't have that, but based on a count here, so in the old plan, just counting from where the ordering is taking place. So you have 2 ordering lanes, and then you have the stacking lanes. If you were to, say, draw more cars, and roughly, so the 2 ordering lanes plus the stacking lanes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 9, before you hit the then handicap parking.
Right.
If I transfer that same car over to today's plan, again roughly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a half, as opposed to 9. Mr. Weber talked about Hudson. He said 8 cars. Now, they may have different dimensions. They may have a longer building. Who knows? We don't know the situation. But I believe we're going to have 2 ordering windows and 2 stacking lanes. The potential for blocking parking, the potential for getting all the way into the street, like we've seen in other places, is reduced and a lot safer. So today's plan doesn't address what we were talking about before, which is blocking parking, critical parking, like the handicap parking. To me, it makes it worse. Mr. Dufault sent in a letter. He said the same. A lot of improvements to today's plan, the entrance, the curve, really will discourage people from leaving on Northeastern Boulevard, and the escape lane, great improvements. But I think going down to one stacking lane is worse than we've seen before.
You're talking about the entrance to the order, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, comments? No? Alderman Tennant?
If I may, just, so looking at the site now, I mean,
the handicap spots that are on the site are not up against the building. Obviously, there are no site, parking spots up against the building, so I'm not sure that moving them to a different location would be that much of a hardship. People are asked now to walk across the parking lot or get across the parking lot without any type of, walkway or anything now, so, I mean, I would have concerns. I think the difference between this site and the other sites too, the other McDonald's sites that people have mentioned tonight is that, the South Nashua site, the one in Hudson, are in much more commercial areas, and I think there's probably, if those get backed up, even if they back up to the street, there's a little bit more of a tolerance for it, because there's traffic in those areas anyways. This one's really, although it's somewhat of a business district, it's much more in a residential area. And so if there is gonna be backup there, which clearly is a potential for, I think it's gonna affect the traffic, even more so on Northeastern Boulevard, people trying to get home or trying to get into that area, so, and I think there are questions that still need to be answered about the site plan, unfortunately.
Okay.
in-
Ed?
Yeah, I just want to ask the members here if, going along with David stating, if they put the handicap down below where they were talking about, and we had that over at the ice cream place, they had the handicap parking and they had to walk across the exit also, and there wasn't a problem at, down on Amherst Street.
Okay.
I don't see a problem with that, having the handicap there, like David's saying. And I think it's better to have 2 lanes coming into that than 1 lane. And double stacking, I think you're gonna get the ability to have that so that it's not stacking all the way out, whereas this one, single lane's gonna stack out faster. So I want everybody's opinion on that. I'd like to hear people's opinion on what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just summarizing what I think I hear all of you saying, because at some point we gotta make some sort of decision to go in a direction with this. It sounds like the parking against the building is not something that many of you are in favor of. And it sounds like the single entrance to the ordering point, no one's speaking as if that's a positive thing at this point.
It definitely
So,
will impact
yeah,
the stack by
right.
bringing it from 2 to
So those are
1.
those are two issues that folks are seeing.
I think the single lane is safer, though, just because if you are backing out, well, I guess if you eliminate those spaces, then it won't be a problem, but as of right now, if you're backing out, then you're backing out across 3 lanes of traffic.
Yeah,
And you have people potentially backing out from the parking on the opposite side, so
Right.
I think that's much more risky.
Yeah, if you didn't have
Personally.
parking against the building,
Then
that
it
wouldn't be an issue, so.
Right.
So, I mean, we really have the option here to, someone can make a motion to approve with the I mean, I don't know if you can make conditions that make that level of modification to a plan, frankly. I'd probably
So we
wanna
just ask
see it
them to come
again.
back,
You can table it with some recommendations, or you can make a motion to disapprove. I mean, there's really 3 things you can do, so somebody,
So if we,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
a question of the way it works. So if we disapprove the application,
stuff,
do they have to completely reapply?
yes.
Yes, and you'd have to state your reasons
Yes.
why you're not approving.
So if we go ahead and lay out what our expectations are and then table it,
Yes.
then the applicant would have a chance to come back with the modifications without having to go through that whole
Correct.
That's
Miguel.
correct.
Let me throw something, Mr. Chair. Can we approve with condition that staff accepts the new plan? They understand what our concerns are. I think they're simple. The applicant said that they're willing to comply with our wishes. I think it's simple enough for staff to accept a new plan on our behalf.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're capable. I think you'd have to put a stipulation in there that has reasonable direction. Like if you're talking about the parking against the building, you'd have to say, no parking spaces against the building,
Can
No
we say
single
no
entry.
public parking? They can leave it as employee parking so that they don't have to come before and have to go through the zoning?
Yeah.
If they
I
have
don't
it
think
just,
they do. I think the answer was that they don't have to go back to zoning. We can grant a waiver for the parking when we
Yeah,
ask that
but
question.
you'd have to come in and ask for it. It's a lot of plan modifications, I think, to do in a stipulation myself, but
yeah, okay.
I'll leave it up to whoever wants to
Yep.
make a motion. Mr. Robbins?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As I look at this and I look at the site plan approval criteria, I realize that my issues come down to numbers 11, 13, and 16. And 11 is the site plan provides adequate means of handling on-site vehicular ingress and egress movements in relation to traffic movements along the abutting streets. 13 is the site plan provides adequate means of handling parking and loading and the number of off-street parking and loading spaces. And 16 is the site plan provides adequate consideration for handling pedestrian circulation, lighting, and location of signs. So I think all of my concerns come down to that. But basically, my concern is, I don't see a way to make this work. I really appreciate that Mr. Barry has gone and tried to take our concerns and to come back and has certainly provided, as far as I'm concerned, some mitigation, but at the same time created some more problems, starting with bringing a car in on Holiday Circle. Mr. Barry's correct that now there's sort of a unification of effort. Everything turns to the right here to go around, and you don't have part of the traffic possibly going west to east over the north side and around. And that may be a good thing. However, everything coming in off of Holiday Circle now takes an immediate right and joins with the automobiles that are coming up to the various windows and then goes around the south end. That is also where cars park when they're waiting for an order or there's a text order process that one can use. So in the few minutes that I was there, at least 2, if not 3 times, a member of the staff came out and walked across, going north to south to the 4 or 5 parking spaces that are along the south border, and handed somebody something to eat. Basically, you have any traffic that is not, well, I think it's all of the traffic now coming into and out of that parking lot has to go around there. So you've got cars coming around, you've got cars coming in from Northeastern Boulevard, and you've got 2 or 3 spots where all of the traffic is joining together in one choke point. I do appreciate that the Northeastern Boulevard entrance is much better configured from the point of view of not allowing somebody to take a right and go out on Northeastern Boulevard. The other part of that is that what it does is it slides the traffic into the right, and I don't know whether that's going to be better as far as parking along the right-hand side or worse. I can't tell Mr. Barry what I think would make this work from my point of view, because I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I'm a layperson. I represent the citizens of Nashua in a lay capacity. I don't see a way to make this work. I mean, I don't. I wish I could say otherwise, but I think that there is too much planned on too small a piece of land without doing some major renovations, and I'm sure that the owners don't want to do that. So I'm kind of in a conundrum.
So are you saying right now that typically the traffic is not flowing like that already?
There is coming in Holiday Circle.
You can
Right
go in the
now.
back.
You can go left or right. Now, everything has to go to the right, joining the traffic coming around. And I think, I may be incorrect, but I think that once you enter McDonald's, I think you can go out onto Holiday Circle. That's possible, but
From the
most
side.
traffic is gonna come around one way or another and on the escape lane by the windows. I mean, it just is, going around and around like that, and I see the more, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the majority of the traffic does that right now.
Well, that's
and-
why I'm asking,
But
because
the fact that I'd rather have it frankly going one way than going two ways in a confused manner myself, but, I mean, I think there are improvements you can make to this, I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, I think adding the double windows improves the existing condition, so,
Oh, yeah,
yeah. Double ordering points.
Yes.
yeah,
so,
double ordering.
Well, and the double stack too, if you
Right.
take away the,
Right, so I'm convinced there are solutions, but I think we need to see it,
yes.
not stipulate.
One other thing I'd like, if we're gonna have them come back, I would really like to have them show vehicles stacked. We asked for that once time when,
It's in the original plan, but you could ask for it in
A
the
drawing.
the new one, too.
yeah, in the new one,
Yeah.
showing all the cars stacked and all the way back to Northeast Boulevard stacked, how many cars it would actually take
Okay.
for a single lane and a double lane. Now, I don't know, the double lane is a great idea because of the people trying to pull out of those right-hand parking spots. I think that might be a problem. But I'd like to, I don't see a problem right now if they move the handicap places. I think that's ensuring that handicap people, those parking spaces are not gonna have trouble getting out of a stacked location. I think that would improve if it was down on where they take out, if somebody has to park there because they are called in or in or whatever.
All right. If somebody will, Mr. Rapucci, so
I would be willing to make a motion.
let's put one on the table.
I'll put one on the table. It might not be something that you want to approve without seeing a plan, but this is the consensus that I'm trying to put together that might satisfy most of us. We make a motion to approve, we allow the double ordering locations, and it goes back to a double stack lane all the way back. So the cars will stack all the way past the bottom of that picture of the building in both lanes, provided they have no parking at all against the building, which would mean that would bring the stacks back closer to the building, which would mean the cars backing out of the spaces on the side would have more room. They wouldn't, even though there's two lanes there, they would have plenty of room. And we grant them whatever parking waiver they require so that they stay conforming to the parking requirements on the site. And that would satisfy me, and I'm hoping some of the other concerned people.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be good with that, but I would rather see it
As a plan.
as a table with those recommendations, and then let's see it. I think that's a modification that could be shown, but that's my opinion, but
Yeah.
I'll take the motion if you wanna.
And just
Yeah,
also
so,
to
yeah.
reiterate some of the things, this McDonald's, all the time, never have all those parking spaces that they have used.
Yeah, I
They're
get it.
rarely that it's.
Well,
fully used.
let's put the motion out. Do you wanna make that motion as it is?
So, yeah, I make the
Okay.
motion that it would be the consensus of the board that we would be inclined to approve a motion, plan that reflects the things I just laid out. And we would send that message to the applicant and table this to a date certain that the applicant's comfortable with to make the modifications we're recommending, if they want to do that. And that would be my motion, that we
Okay,
make that recommendation and then table it.
Second.
all right. So we have a motion by Mr. Rapucci to table the application and provide input to the applicant that we are looking for a revised plan that doesn't have parking against the building. It has, a double stack configuration going into the order points. And also, if there needs to be a waiver for parking numbers, that they return with that.
Also,
Element-
to move the handicap parking to the south area, does that need to be said, or they're going to?
Well,
I
To
think we let them.
Have to
I'd
present
let them do
something.
that.
Okay,
Okay. So we got that motion. Do we have a second?
I seconded
A
it.
second discussion, Dave?
Real quick, I just want to go on the record as saying I'm going to vote against this, not because I don't think that this is necessarily a step forward, but I don't want to send the applicant a message that, oh, if we just do this, then that will satisfy the board. I'm honestly not sure what would satisfy me. Not that nothing would, but that it's really hard for me. Every time something happens, something else happens. It's a sort of a closed system in that respect.
Okay.
And so I just want to go on record with that.
Understood. Any other further discussion?
Mr. Leclerc?
Yep.
Will it be going to table it to the June 21st meeting or the July 12th? Just want to have a date.
I would leave it at the option of the applicant.
Okay, so the next meeting then, June 21st?
Yes.
Okay.
All those in favor of that motion? Aye. Opposed? One? All right, so the application is tabled, so. Okay. Gonna move on to old business site plan, case number 2. That particular application has been tabled to a date uncertain. New business conditional special use permits, there are none. New business subdivision plan, case number 3. Wagner and Andrea Montagnini, owners, Helton and Rodriguez applicant. Application and acceptance of proposed 2-lot subdivision. Properties at 75.5 Pine Hill Road. Do I have a motion that this application is ready to take jurisdiction?
So moved.
We have a motion to accept jurisdiction by Mr. Robbins, a second by Mr. Rapucci. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. I'm gonna read it again.
All right, floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Steve Auger. I'm a project manager with Hayner Swanson, and our office is located at 3 Congress Street here in Nashua. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Helton Rodriguez, who is in the audience tonight. Also joining us is attorney Gerald Prunier, providing legal counsel for Mr. Rodriguez. As you read, we've come before you seeking approval for a 1-into-2 lot subdivision for the tract located at 75.5 Pine Hill Road. Just quickly, some background information on it. It currently is lot 1351, map E. It is 0.613 acres in size. It's zoned R9 suburban residence. The abutters, it has residences to the east and the south. There are business condominiums to the north, and the Nashua Airport tracks are to the west across Sharon Ave. The subdivision plan was previously approved 10 years ago on May 1st, 2008. The plan was never recorded and the approval lapsed. As part of that approval, the prior applicant received a variance for lot width. If you look at one of the plans up on the board, the lot on the upper left corner where it fronts on Sharon Avenue, that's where they received the variance. And the lot width on that tract needs to be 90 feet, and the zoning board allowed a variance for exactly what the frontage is, 75.04.
Okay.
Per the National Land Use Code, that variance goes with the land, so that's why it's still active for this project. As it says in the staff report, this site is a listed asbestos site on the NHDES website. Mr. Rodriguez is aware of that, and he has reached out to an environmental firm who specializes in this type of work. So any type of excavation that occurs, whether it's the foundation or a utility installation or whatnot, that firm is going to have to be there for that and will partake in that construction. As we don't know exactly where we would encounter asbestos, what happens is as they're digging, if they do find something, then that firm kind of stops work on the project, takes over, secures it, caps it, makes it safe for everyone, and then continues those operations until the open parts of the site are secure, so that then the site contractor can continue with his work, and there's no safety or health risks for anyone. So as long as the site work is continuing on that site, the environmental firm has to be there on all those days. So, like I said, Mr. Rodriguez has reached out to a firm to engage their services for that, to help with the fact that this is an asbestos site. We have also received some comments from the National Airport Authority as this tract falls in the airport approach zone. They have some concerns specifically with structure heights and any type of tree heights. So we do have their comments. I've been in touch with the manager of the National Airport Authority. There are a couple gentlemen in the audience tonight who I believe are going to speak about the project as well. We're more than willing to work with them to meet whatever requirements they have to kind of put to bed any issues that they have with the height of the structure. I've already spoken to Mr. Rodriguez about that in terms of how high a house he can build with the requirements and comments that they've given us, and that shouldn't be an issue at all. In terms of the height of the landscape, I'm going to get to that in a moment. There is a waiver request that does deal with that as well. We are requesting 3 waivers tonight, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Two of them are somewhat simple, so I'll just kind of explain those. One of them does deal with the sidewalk contribution. I'd like to read that one in just to get that on the record. The first waiver request is Section 190-221, and this waiver deals with all electrical lines that service a project. Currently, there is overhead electric and telephone out in Sharon Ave and out on Pine Hill Road. We're requesting a waiver to, as opposed to putting those utilities underground, to power the new house from one of the overhead lines that's on Sharon Ave. Putting those underground would result in some significant expense to my client. And if you look around, all the other homes out there are serviced by overhead. So allowing this would just allow the new house to be in common with all the other neighbors out there. The second waiver request deals with the sidewalk. That one I'll actually read. It is Section 190-212, requires new sidewalks to be constructed along the property's frontage on public streets. The waiver request is to waive the construction of a new sidewalk along the site's frontages on Pine Hill Road and Sharon Avenue for a financial contribution. A 1-2 lot subdivision is proposed upon the subject property. The property is unique in the fact that it has frontage along both Pine Hill Road and Sharon Avenue. Currently, there is no sidewalk along either frontage. Per Section 190-212D2, a contribution in lieu of the construction of sidewalks along an existing street may be accepted when 1, none of the lots may be subdivided into additional buildable lots under the minimum requirements of the zone, as an additional lot would not conform to the minimum lot size or other dimensional requirements of the zone. And 2, the existing street adjacent to the proposed lots has no sidewalks for a distance of 250 feet on the same side of the street as the new lots. It is our opinion that this project meets those requirements of the regulation. Given the above information, it makes much more sense for the city to accept a contribution in lieu of construction of sidewalks and direct those funds to a higher priority sidewalk location. We are aware that in May 2008, when the subdivision was originally approved by the planning board, the sidewalk contribution amount was stipulated to be $9,541. That contribution included the Pine Hill Road frontage in addition to the Sharon Avenue frontage. It is our feeling that since the new development results only in a new residential lot along Sharon Avenue, that the contribution should be based on solely the Sharon Avenue frontage. The applicant proposes to contribute the sum equal to $50 per linear foot for the length required on Sharon Avenue, which is 75.04 feet. At the rate of $50 per linear foot, the total contribution would be $3,752. The third waiver request, as I mentioned, deals with landscaping height, and this was brought about by some of the airport's requests. The land use code requires that for every 40 feet of frontage on a lot, you have to put in a street tree, and we've shown that on our landscaping detail. So the airport's concern is that eventually, at some point in time, that tree is going to grow and grow and grow, and it's going to interfere with the airspace. So we're requesting a waiver for the one required street tree just on the Sharon Avenue lot. In its place, Mr. Rodriguez is willing to plant some low-growing shrubs that will, obviously won't have any impact on the height associated with, with the approach runway.
Okay.
We believe the site is being developed in a responsible manner in accordance with the National Land Use Code. The recommended conditions of approval are acceptable to our client, and we respectfully seek your approval and be glad to answer any questions if you have them.
All right, thanks. Mr. Rapucci?
I'm very confused, and it's my fault, it's not the way you're presenting it, but I just want to understand what was approved in 2008. So if I look at that picture over there, there's three pieces, the outlined yellow, the two lots that are outlined in yellow. That's presently one piece of property?
Correct.
And the third one, the corner one, isn't involved in this?
Right.
It's just-
The
you're
corner
splitting
corner
that
one's
into
just
two.
in a butter.
Okay, I'm sure it's obvious, I just
Yep.
was having a hard time grabbing that.
No,
Okay.
The best way to describe it is it's an L-shaped lot that with two frontages. In the lot that has the actual double frontage is just a separate abutter.
Can you just clarify, so but the subdivision plan that was approved before, the line of the lot lines is the same on both? It's
Yeah, I don't know
the plan
the.
that changed?
I don't know the exact acreage. It might be, a couple hundred square feet different, because we had to draw our lot line. There's an existing porch on the back of the house that's at 75.5. So we had to draw our lot line so that porch in the building wouldn't the porch is going to be raised. We had to draw the lot line so that the house wouldn't be in the rear yard setback. So I don't know how the previous firm that did it 10 years ago configured the line, but that's how we did it.
Okay.
But the plan integrity is the same. It's 1 into 2.
Okay. Other questions? To the applicant. Mr. Weber?
I have a question for staff. The contribution, in the past, when we have one house that's there and they're subdividing and adding it, what has been the precedent?
We would collect for both lots.
Okay, even though there's a house there,
Correct.
still go for both
Correct.
houses? Okay, and how much would that be?
It's, $1,541.
Okay.
Other questions for the applicant? Mr. Dukern?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple of quick ones, Mr. Auger. The 2008 approval had two steps that I don't know if they've been taken care of in some other way. The first one is that the applicant was to provide approval from Pennachuck Water for their service.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pro.
If you go back to 2008, number 3, stipulation number 3 stated, prior to recording the subdivision plan, the applicant shall provide the Division of Public Works approval of water service from Pennachuck Water. That-
For the new lot or for the existing house?
Didn't say.
Oddly enough, the existing house currently is on a well.
Yes.
As part of our plan, we're showing that we're going to abandon the well and tie the existing Pine Hill Road house lot onto Pennachuck. So if the plan on the right details that.
Right, but as it says here, an approval from Pennachuck is needed. I don't know the intent of that back then. I don't recall. So I don't know if it needs to be revisited. But there must have been some reason behind it. So that's the first one. And stipulation number number 9 then talked about having a note on the plan indicating that the lot is in close proximity to the airport. I know you've talked to the airport, and that it's subject to aircraft noise and flight operations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That was a stipulation as well, so, we can revisit those and see if those are still necessary. Aside from that, quick thing, you notice there's a small shed on the new lot to be relocated to the, where the existing house is. And I know this is pictorial, but the shed is drawn without, I think, the required setback. I think the setback is 6 feet. And whereas they may not have that today, I think the new location should have the setback unless they get a variance for it.
Yeah, you're talking about the two little sheds right on the corner there where the lot?
I thought that's the same one being relocated.
There's two right in between the house and the bigger building. There's two tiny little sheds there. I believe we have both of those labeled as being relocated.
Okay, okay. I thought we were moving one to the other.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, Steve. No, it's currently two separate buildings, and we have them labeled both. We're not moving one to another position so that it would violate a setback. Both of them would have to be moved so that they don't violate any of the side yard setbacks.
That's the idea. Okay, got it. All right, and lastly, so the applicant must be aware that we are paving Sharon Avenue
Yep.
this year.
Yep. We've talked about that, and we've been in touch with Mandeep Gill about that. We're actively talking with a utility contractor to provide utility stubs for the Sharon parcel, from there to get them into the property, so that we're kind of, racing against the clock here. It's my understanding that the paving contractor has not submitted a list to you folks yet of the order of what streets that they're going to pave. So we're hoping to, by sometime early July or so, have a contractor be able to do that work.
Okay, and further discussion with her, you would find out that it's reclamation that's planned. So if you coordinate with her, instead of having to do the required cutbacks and so on, if you reclaim the street, there is some benefit to doing that. So please coordinate with her. However, Pine Hill Road, if you've been out there, you've seen the condition deteriorate over the winter. And the city does have a plan to pave. They haven't figured out what the restoration plan is. They're waiting for recommendations from a geotechnical engineer. It very well could be done this year based on what the recommendation is. You do have cuts on Pine Hill Road too, so you probably want to advance that as well.
We'd have the contractor do everything at once, because we have to have gas and water come in from Sharon, and then we're having water and sewer into Pine Hill. So, I mean, it just really makes sense to stub it all at once.
Very good, thanks.
Can you, just for our sake, do you have an idea of what the max building height will be that wouldn't impact the airport?
The airport folks have told us they don't want it to exceed 32 feet above ground level. So in talking to Mr. Rodriguez, he's come up with some floor heights and the roof height and whatnot where we can build it in the 30 to 32 foot range, so we wouldn't exceed what they've asked us not to.
Yeah, so essentially you could get a 2-story, but
Yep.
that'd be the max, likely.
Yep, yeah, and that's always looking to build just a typical, you know, two-story, single-family home.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant? No? Okay. Thanks. At this time, I'd ask for anybody wishing to speak in opposition to the plan to come forward, state your name and address for the record, and go ahead and let us know what kind of questions and concerns you have.
Good evening. My name is Farrell Woods. I'm the chairman of the Nashua Airport Authority Board of Directors, 93, Perimeter Road in Nashua. So before this meeting, we had a few words with, Mr. Auger and Mr. Prunier, about this plan. And, I believe that we can work together. As you heard earlier, we are sensitive to the height of the building and the height of anything else that is put on the property, namely trees or other structures that the client or any future purchasers of the property might wish to put there. Because obviously the building would be under what's called the runway protection zone. We have to protect, the approaches to the runway. It's actually a federal requirement. We're required to do this by our grant obligations at the airport. So this is a sensitive matter to us. We don't want to deny these folks the ability to subdivide and the ability to have and enjoy a home there, but we do have to work with them. So I do have a couple of questions, and one of these, it didn't occur to me when we had our little sidebar with, with Mr. Auger and Mr. Prunier before this meeting. I don't know if this board is aware, but there is also a plan afoot to widen Sharon Ave where it joins Pine Hill Road to create a dedicated right-hand turn lane. So we're wondering how that dovetails with, this particular effort here. I don't know if you folks have the answer to that question off the tops of your heads, but we were told originally at the airport that, the city would not take any of the airport property on the west side of Sharon Ave to do that. So it's got to come out of somewhere, and, we're wondering what the answer to that question is. And, see,
Steve,
so.
do you know anything
Yeah,
about that?
yeah.
Yeah.
I could provide an answer right to this point. We have coordinated with Mr. Auger's office with our plan. It's been done through my office, and we will not be touching airport property. There's a lot of right-of-way there, and there's a lot of land available on the applicant side for us to do widening. And the existing pavement is pretty wide as it is, but in order to get a full right-hand turn lane, we have to do some widening, and which will occur on the eastern side of Sharon Avenue.
Okay, well, thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure.
But I think anyway, in summary, I think we can, we can work with, with the planner, Mr. Prunier, to, come up with some sort of compromise. Ideally, the airport would like to control or own property under the runway protection zone, but we realize, and other airports have this problem too, we realize that that isn't always possible. So in those cases, we need to work with the, with the property owners and work with their plans, for the property. So that's all I have for now.
We'll start with Ed.
What was the building height not to exceed?
32 feet above ground level.
Thank you.
Mr. Robbins?
What is the runway protection zone? In other words, how wide, how far, that sort of thing?
So, okay. Okay, so my engineers provided me with a little drawing of the runway protection zone. So it is in the shape of a trapezoid. The narrowest part is 500 feet, and that overlays, the physical end of the runway, 100 feet from the physical end of the runway. It projects outwards, in other words, toward Sharon Ave, for a length of 1,700 feet. At its widest point, it is 1,010 feet wide.
So,
So it overlays a good chunk of land.
all right, so essentially, if you started at the end of the runway the runway protection zone, the limits are going to be 1,800 feet from the edge, because you said it starts at the 100 feet after the end of the runway?
Before the end of the runway, actually. So we have something called a displaced threshold on the
Yep.
runway. What that means, for people who aren't, pilots and all that, what that means is that there's a big set of stripes that's offset from the physical end of the runway, in this case to the northwest a little bit, because that's the runway's orientation. So there's a big set of stripes there, and what that means is that the pilots are not to land before that set of stripes. And that set of stripes is placed 300 feet from the physical end of the runway. And the reason why we have this displaced threshold is precisely because, there are obstructions, namely buildings, on Sharon Ave. And, it's designed to put a buffer between airplanes that are approaching the runway and the tops of those buildings.
All right. One final question, does the height limits change as you get farther and farther away from the end of the runway, or do they remain at 32 feet?
Oh, it gets higher. The further away from the runway you get, that number goes up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah, I just want to be clear, when you say you can work with them and compromise, I'm thinking that's not required, right? If the applicant agrees to not build his house higher than 32 feet and agrees not to plant a species of tree that grows beyond 32 feet, there's no issue with you guys, right?
We can have a gentleman's agreement. It might be a little bit better to,
That's what I mean. I don't know what a gentleman's agreement means. If we stipulate in the approval of the plan that they can't do that, I'm not sure what more they need to do. What do they need to do beyond satisfy the stipulations that we put on it?
so what happens when somebody comes along in the future and purchases that property? Are they going to be bound by those same stipulations?
Yes?
Excellent, okay, that works for me.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks, appreciate it. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition to the plan or concern? Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. For the record, my name is Gerald Prunier. I'm an attorney in Nashua and represent the applicant. The Airport Authority has brought up a couple of points, one of which is control and some other things. And they're not unreasonable things that we could recommend to our client to consider, but they're beyond the scope of this board. So we are going to continue to talk to the Airport Authority about those particular problems. The other thing I'd like to say is on the sidewalk. These are two small lots. Sidewalks will probably never be built on Pine Hill Road. Probably will be maybe on Sharon. Doubt it. The only sidewalk that now exists is the one around Belvan's Beverage on this particular thing. I think I just want to be consistent in my opposition to the fact that when you have an existing lot, that you have to penalize that lot when you subdivide another lot out. I don't think it's fair, and I want to make sure that that's consistent on the record. It's just not fair, especially when there's not connections between sidewalks on the existing lot, and it probably never will be. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else wishing to speak in favor of the plan? Any further questions before I close the hearing? No? Okay. All right, at this time, we'll close the public hearing on the application and move into the public meeting. So we basically, we have a two-lot subdivision, one that's been approved before in terms of subdivision. It looks like a different sort of use with a new building intended to be constructed. We have 3 waivers on the staff report. And sidewalk contribution that's been offered. There's some, obviously, discussion within the board about what the right amount is.
How's everybody looking at me?
There's a
I'm
couple.
not looking at you, I'm looking at him.
There's the issue with the heights of the tree and the buildings, which I think, as Mr. Rapucci indicated, we could stipulate
Yeah.
no building or
Yeah.
other tree or anything higher than 32 feet on the site as well, if somebody so chooses. So I'll open it up to any other comments. Yeah.
On what you were saying,
Yeah.
stipulation 10, I would recommend, building or tree height will not exceed 32 feet above ground level.
Can I
Yeah,
just speak to that?
yeah.
Of
course.
It might be better, as far as the tree goes, to specify a species of tree that will not grow higher than that. You know what I mean? If they plant, like, there are certain, they know exactly how big they're gonna grow. Somebody plants a maple there, and then 5 years from now, it's taller than 32 feet.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if we require them to plant a species that doesn't grow higher than that.
Okay.
Then we don't have to worry about it 20 years from now. If that's cool.
May I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, go ahead,
Just
Mr. Robin.
occurs to me, if this is governed by federal regulations, why are we addressing this at all? We don't, as far as I know, the feds trump us.
Alderman Tenza?
If I may, I mean, I would think my concern would be keeping somebody out of federal court someday when a tree is higher than 32 feet, or, certainly if a building is built and someone else wants to come in at a later date and build an additional structure higher than 32 feet, they'd have to come back to the planning board, but I would think that would be protection for not just this landowner, but any future landowner.
What happens if and when the federal government decides that the limits are 40 feet?
Well, I think that could be addressed if the federal government changes it. They could go down to 16 feet, right? And in which case, again, they would have to litigate that somehow.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
One other thing, one other thing.
Ed?
I asked staff on this, and I think we need to be consistent. We should be consistent, let's say that. And I understand that it doesn't seem fair, and sometimes we have made concessions. I just want to see what the rest of us feel.
You're talking about 192.12,
The 9,541. So I just want to have everybody weigh on it before we actually put a number down there.
Yeah, I think Maggie had the question first, right?
Oh, I just wanted to mention something, just that I went and visited the site today, and this might not have any bearing on your decision, but it seemed to me that any driveway that was put in there would be a blind driveway, because there's a fence that separates the lot from Vantage Point next door, and then if you look to the left, you can't see anyone coming around the corner, because there's a lot of vegetation. And also, the traffic was backed up from Pine Hill past the property, actually going towards Amherst Street, and it did seem a bit dangerous to me.
Okay. All right. Anybody else comment? Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah, I'll just say my piece on the sidewalk thing. If we are going to, we have, in the thing that I sent out is a copy of 212, 192.12. That ordinance gives our board complete discretion on that. We have no obligation to go from one site to another. We've had previous sites, as recently as last meeting, where an applicant asked for a waiver and offered a specific amount of money as a stipulation. That's not what this applicant is doing. That applicant didn't do what this applicant is doing. They didn't. I kind of wanted to question it, but I didn't, because they just came forward and they offered the $50 a foot for their entire lot. Or that's what came out of them in the planning department. This applicant is saying, is asking us to consider it. The other applicants weren't, so we're not obligated to say, well, we charge them so much, so we have to charge this. We have, in fact, 192.12 specifically states that we have that discretion to apply it any way we want. We can waive it, we can set the fee. So I think we're well within our authority and our bounds to do that. I think what the applicant is saying is very reasonable. Those two other structures have been there for how many years, and they're not changing at all. The only thing that's really changing is the frontage on that back lot. I think it's a reasonable request to say that's the change, and if you're going to apply that fee, which I don't think we should, but if you're going to apply it, just apply it to that frontage.
We have also, on other places, done the similar thing, that it was a complete going around, and we only applied it to one side, not to the other side, just one side. So, it happens. So I'm asking, what does everybody here feel? I'm not doing this on my own. I'm asking what everybody else feels.
Well, I agree with Jerry. In the other case he was speaking about, they didn't ask for a different amount.
Right.
But in this case, they are. So we should consider it.
Yeah, I would just give my experience, having been on the board for a lot of years and looked at a lot of these. I've done the whole lot line in the majority of the instances that I've been involved with, so that's my 2 cents.
What are you saying? The 3,000 or the 5,000?
No, the full lot line, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they know when they get into subdivide that that's gonna,
Yep.
I mean, they own both lots, so, you know, it's just part of the work.
It is. And if they want it changed, then they have to get a ruling from the city council. Change the thing.
Well,
Change the ordinance, or the way that we do things.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it in both directions, that's
Yeah.
my opinion.
And so if I may, generally, I'm in favor of building sidewalks, and I'm in favor of doing things as they've traditionally been done. In this case, however, though, I think the thing that's different for me is that, there is some additional work that the owner of the subdivision needs to do with the asbestos, which I think is gonna cost quite a bit of money in mitigating that. So I think they're actually doing the city service in that respect and bringing this parcel of land back into use and paying for the cost of that. So in this case specifically, I would be in favor of them just making the donation for the new lot. But I think generally, having people make a donation for sidewalks throughout the city is a good thing.
David? Okay.
Steve, any
He's
opinion?
still thinking.
Without opining on what the size of the construction should be, which frontage or whatever, I think the applicant's engineer made a good argument about waiving the requirement to build a sidewalk, because we've seen where we've built sidewalks to nowhere before. However, the attorney talked about this location that will, in his view, never have a sidewalk. I don't think that's gonna, that's the right way to look at this, because if you've looked at Pine Hill Road and Sharon Avenue, they've become quite busy. Obviously, the city's paying attention to these streets. And some point in the future, you will see sidewalks, because Pine Hill Road has a lot of residential buildings, and you gotta get people safely. And there are pieces of sidewalks on Pine Hill Road. So, yeah, today, there isn't a real push. We shouldn't have pushed them to build a sidewalk or those little pieces of sidewalk, but certainly the city should consider this as a long-term project, building safe sidewalks to get these residents connected to the commercial area on Amherst Street. So, we go back and forth between how much they should pay. I don't know. I would go along with the majority.
Okay.
Can I ask, what was in the $3,000 What was the figure that the applicant asked for?
3752. Any other comments? No? At this point, anybody willing to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Ed, go ahead.
New business number 3, subdivision, 75 and 1/2 Pine Hill Road. Showing the plan does meet NRO 190, 138G, with 3 waiver requests. The first, 190-212, requiring sidewalks, is granted, finding the waiver will not be contrary to the spirit and the intent, and the applicant has agreed to pay $3,752 in lieu. The second request, 190-221C, requiring electrical lines, is granted, finding the waiver will not be contrary in the spirit and the ordinance. Waiver number 3, 190-185B, requiring shade trees for every 40 linear feet, is granted, will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the ordinance. 4 through 9 as written, and I'm going to add a 10th. Building height or a tree height that grows will not grow higher than, will not exceed 32 feet above ground level.
Okay. So we have that motion from Ed. Is there a second on that?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Rapucci. Any discussion? Mr. Robbins?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this back and forth, and I come back again to, until we have a discussion and come up with a more clear policy on this, I think I'm going to side with what we have done in the past, which is require, if there is a waiver, the entire length of the frontage. So I would, as written, I would vote against this, and I would be willing to second if anyone chose to put forward an amendment to go with the, I think it's 9541 figure instead of the 3752 figure.
Okay. Ed, are you willing to make that amendment, or yes? or
No.
Okay. All right. So we have the motion. We have a second. Any other further discussion?
Not to stick a
Go ahead, Mr.
fork in
Rapucci.
anything, but one of the requirements the planning board had asked us, the planning department had asked us to consider when we accept the sidewalk fee, which I think we shouldn't have, is when they pay that fee. And the practice, the planning board gave us information that their previous practice has always been at the time it's registered at the registry.
Yeah.
That's what I'm gonna
prior-
In the last, I'm sorry?
It's in here. It's in the, it's in.
In
the-
there.
It is?
Yeah,
Yes,
it's in the motion.
payment made prior to
Prior
the
to
recording the
recording.
plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in-
Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Okay, any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Mr. Robbins, any abstentions? No? All right, motion passes.
I think
I
Linda.
was just gonna ask, Mr. Rapucci, before you voted, limiting the height to 32 feet for the building, would that be a zoning issue?
I don't know. I don't know that the zoning board would put a restriction
Okay.
on a piece of property that's less than what the code allows, right? So if they were looking to go higher than what the code allows, I believe it would be a zoning issue.
Okay.
But where they're actually allowed probably 35 feet or more, if it wasn't for that, I think no.
Okay.
That's my opinion. Mr. Prunier will
Mr.
tell you.
Attorney Prunier had brought that up. That's why I thought I would ask you. You're the expert with zoning.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to,
Can we take a quick break?
yeah, we'll take
Got to be at least
five.
35.
Take 5, yeah.
that's the,
So 48
height
past.
on it.
Now up to new business site plan, case number 4, 1987 Tamposi Limited Partnership owner, application and acceptance of proposed site plan amendment NR 2115 to show 2 proposed parking lot additions. Property is located at 10 State Street. Do I have a motion that this application is ready for us to take jurisdiction?
So moved.
Mr. Robbins, any seconds?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Rapucci. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Jim Petropoulos. I'm a civil engineer at Hayner Swanson in Nashua, New Hampshire, doing business at 3 Congress Street. With me tonight is Attorney Gerald Pruning, our project attorney. And as just read into the record, we are seeking a site plan approval for 2 parking lot additions on property located at 10 State Street. My job here tonight is to present the facts of this site plan application and answer any questions you might have. The location of this site, let me help you get located. We are out on State Street. Now, State Street is a small cul-de-sac off of Amherst Street out in the northwest part of Nashua. I guess Gold's Gym is a local recognizable building here. This is State Street that also connects into Capitol. And this is the site here at the very end of State Street. It's a 4.5 acre site located in the Park Industrial Zone. And our neighbors really are commercial properties located in this park that was built basically in the 70s and the 80s. Behind our building is the railroad tracks, and of course on the other side of the tracks is the city-owned Westwood Park property. Currently, this site contains about a 64,000 square foot building. Historically, it's been used as a warehouse in the traditional sense. The site contains 17 loading dock doors, majority on the north side of the building, a couple here on the west side. It has 57 paved parking spaces, and then there's a gravel area here on the east side of the site that probably supports another 50 spaces. Access is to the site directly off the cul-de-sac. On State Street, we have all the necessary utilities to the site. There's no wetlands on the property, but being in the northwest corner of Nashua, we are located in the Water Supply Protection District. What's being proposed with this application are 2 paved parking areas in 2 different locations on the site. The first one is in the northwest corner of the site, and it's approximately a 52-space addition, pavement. And then in the southeast corner of the site, we hope to remove the graveled area, which is currently used for parking, and replace it with paved surface parking. The 17 loading dock doors will be, only 4 of them will be proposed in use. And then there's an at-grade door here on the west side that will remain. Now, the reason for this request is that our client, property owner, has a tenant who's anxious to occupy the building for use for a warehouse and distribution facility, and it is Amazon Logistics. So Amazon intends to use this building to provide last mile of customer delivery phase for the greater Nashua area. So I just want to take a minute and describe what a 24-hour period might feel like on this particular property. Packages will be delivered to the site from a larger warehouse facility somewhere in the northeast. Approximately 7 haul trucks or tractor-trailer trucks will make deliveries to those 4 dock doors between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. daily. There will be approximately 70 employees inside the building, sorters, who will unload those vehicles and place them in racks within the building, okay, for the next day delivery. And that work will be performed between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. So it's largely, well, we're traditionally all sleeping, lots going on in this building. The big trucks are coming in, shipping in the goods, they're getting stacked and stored inside the racking. Now, the first wave of drivers arrives about 6 o'clock the next morning. And what they do is they park their car out on site. They grab their company-owned van, which is parked on the site. They drive the van into the building, load for the day. They get their destination, they get their routes, then they leave, and then they exit the site and go out on their routes.
And there's approximately 100 drivers in total that work at this facility. But they stagger between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. on that process, because if they all came in at once, it would be a little bit jumbled. So that staggering allows a smooth transition of the goods to go from inside the building into the vans and then out on the routes. And then when the routes are complete, the drivers come back, they park their vans on the property, pick up their car, and then they head home. During the course of the day, there's activity in the building, minor activity with employees. And there's also, at times, people coming and going for drop-off and deliveries. Now, this property, as I mentioned earlier, has been used traditionally as a warehouse, and it had been used by Amazon for a number of years. But in this day and age of e-commerce, where they are trying to deliver products, in some instances the next day, it's this type of logistics, this type of operation that I just described is what is occurring here now, versus years ago when the trucks would come, they'd unload the goods and they'd get delivered when they get delivered. There are no proposed exterior improvements to the building. Amazon likes the building just the way it is. There is some interior work in the racking that needs to be done to facilitate their workload. A couple items, Mr. Chairman, relative to the site plan application that this board is typically interested in. With regard to traffic, we've submitted a traffic impact report worksheet. It did not meet the thresholds of needing further study. As you know, that if you exceed certain AM peak or PM peak vehicle counts, then more work is needed. Largely due the fact we didn't meet the threshold is that staggering from 6 a.m. To 9 a.m. on the drivers arriving, getting their delivery routes, and then leaving the site. And the numbers that we prepared in the traffic report didn't even compare to the previous use. It was just as if it was a vacant building, and the building's been vacant for about 8 months. Stormwater, we do have two new areas of pavement. There weren't many options available to stormwater here. This part of Nashua, this whole park here, is very consistent. It has very sandy soils, but it also has high groundwater, as evidenced by some of the wetlands across the railroad tracks and, of course, Brown Pond. We dug test pits in the locations of these two paved areas, and we found estimated high water at about 5 feet down. And so what we're proposing to do to provide qualitative and quantitative treatment for the two paved areas is with the use of porous pavement along a row here and along a row here. And if you're not familiar with porous pavement, it's sometimes called popcorn pavement. It has voids in the top layer of surface, and what it does is promote the vertical movement of water through the surface, through the gravel and sand layer below it, and then either into groundwater or into a pipe. And that filtering, that vertical movement through the subsoil provides the cleansing and filtering of the stormwater runoff. Since this site is located in the Water Supply Protection District, we submitted plans and stormwater information to Donald Ware, Chief Operating Officer of Pennachuck, and he has weighed in on it. I think he provided a letter to staff supporting the application. Open space, Mr. Chairman, currently the site is 22%. Because of the need of car parking and company-owned vehicle parking, we need pavement, and we're essentially paving this site. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. We are down to 10% open space, and of course that required a variance from the zoning board, which was granted earlier this month. Two waivers, Mr. Chairman, in a letter dated by written by myself on May 21st. The first has to do with interior raised parking aisles. When you have an interior parking bay greater than 10 spaces, they like to see raised parking. Again, in order to satisfy the needs of this particular tenant, they needed parking. We are providing 232 parking spaces on this site. Implementing raised islands would cut into parking, and it would also provide some maintenance issues. I mean, if you look at the existing site right now, I mean, the better part of the area around the building is currently paved. Staff kind of pushed back a little bit and said, geez, Jim, what can we do? And I just brought a little sketch here, something we had sent to staff. There's actually 2 painted islands in front of this building right in here. And our client agreed to go ahead and curb those and raise those and get some landscaping in there just to soften it up in front of the building. And he's certainly agreeable to do that. And that would be part of our waiver request, Mr. Chairman. The second request has to do actually with the maximum number of parking spaces. As you know, the National Land Use Code for a particular use has a minimum and a maximum on parking. We exceed the maximum by code. I think it's around 185 spaces are allowed by code, and we're proposing 232. The reason is to simply just meet the needs of the tenant. They would actually like more parking. We've pretty much got as much parking as we can get. Again, there's parking in the northeast corner, there's parking here along the side, and of course, we're replacing the gravel with paved surface parking. Those 4 dock doors are going to remain in effect and in use. So 2 waivers, interior raised islands, and then also for maximum number of parking spaces. Our tenant goal is to occupy the building on July 1. In order to accomplish that, if we're successful tonight, they'll likely break ground on construction of these 2 parking areas tomorrow. And the contractor tells us that he can meet that deadline. So in summary, we believe the plan satisfies, good engineering practices, meets the code, given the variance from the zoning board. The staff conditions are certainly acceptable to us. And at this point, I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
I got a couple, just, the parking areas, is there security on the, I mean?
No.
Is there generally, though, 24/7, there's activity in the
Yeah.
parking, so it's not,
Right.
because, one of the issues we have with no islands is, unsupervised parking lots become kind of places to mess around with other cars and things, but you think this one's gonna have enough activity on it that that's not gonna be an issue for the tenant?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I got a feeling that the company, when they get their legs underneath them, is going to get into a rhythm of kind of knowing where to park every day for their drivers, knowing where their van is to pick it up, get in the building and go.
okay,
I do not know if there's security cameras on the building. That's something I don't know that they're going to do.
okay,
They certainly could.
okay. And then, do you think it's accurate to say that the majority of the traffic coming out from State Street on Amherst is sort of heading sort of to the east, I guess? Southeast, the majority?
Yeah, I would say majority, but I don't know that it's
Yeah.
significantly one way. Of course, we know that the State Street is divided, is open right there, so they
Cut
can make a
there,
lift.
right? It's a tough turn on the left there.
It is,
so,
it is.
yeah.
But they could go left to go west. They could also go north by going up to, Pennachuck Square and getting on the Continental Boulevard to get to the Everett in that direction. Or, of course, they can turn right and go east into
Yeah.
Somerset. And so
Okay.
my intuition is, yes, that they're probably more going east, but again, the service area is Greater Nashua.
Right.
Milford, Amherst, points west.
Okay. Other questions, Ed?
Thank you. The parking that you're gonna do in this lower southeast
Yeah.
area, are you removing trees?
Before I answer, let me just grab my drawing just a second. Yes, there's approximately 20 trees on our 20 feet of trees on our property that we'll be cutting in an easterly direction.
Will
But
the-
everything's on our property.
Will there still be trees on the opposite property? Because as you know, when you take that out, it heats the pavement, gets hot and heats the,
Yeah, it looks by our survey that there's remaining vegetation along the property line. with some remaining on our neighbor's property. But in order to get the geometry there, to get the parking to work, there's about 20 feet right there along that edge.
Yeah, as long as there's some other trees there,
Okay.
the perimeter is good. Second question, currently you have an open dumpster that's huge. How are you planning on getting rid of trash? Are you gonna have a trash container inside the building, or it appears that there's a place on the northeast side of the building that has a place for a huge dumpster that locks onto, that's, are you gonna what are you gonna be doing with the existing one that's just an open dumpster there? Is that remaining, or are you gonna do something with that?
Well, let me ask Jerry.
Okay?
I honestly don't know, Ed. I
Okay.
can find out.
'Cause
I jest, but,
It's, unless
you
you
know,
have a-
I suspect the building's been vacant. We certainly don't want it at our front door. You're saying it's right here in the front door?
No,
Yeah, okay. So let me find out if they intend on using it. It needs to be enclosed, correct?
it's huge,
Okay,
good size.
that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's generally in the proposed parking spaces right now.
Okay.
So,
That's mine.
other questions? Maggie?
Not to push this issue too much further, but I was on site today and they were already prepping the area on the right side and they've cut down a lot of trees already.
You did? Yeah.
And the trees on that side are large, mature trees. Do you have a percentage of what is going to be cut on the property?
I don't. As I said, we were 22% open space before this application, and that counted the gravel area as being open space, non-pavement, so it's a little bit
Yeah.
misleading. I think we are, we're adding about 22,000 feet of new pavement total between the two areas, so.
Other questions for the applicant?
Yeah.
Steve?
Thank you. Mr. Petropoulos, I was just reading the traffic report from Pano, and I didn't see here where the city traffic engineer looked at it, so I don't know if he did and sent any comments, but the calculations done by the traffic company, traffic engineer, looking at the TIR, the worksheet, I think those are based, say for instance, the morning peak hour. He said 62 trips generated, and the threshold is 75 per hour, so it's pretty close. So I'm gonna guess, and you keep going on the PM, development peak hours, 75, 76, the threshold is 100, the 24-hour period is 834, the threshold is 1,200. So those would work without requiring a full report if the plan stays as presented, right? So the overnight shift, 70 employees and 5 managers. And then during the days, 100 employees and 100 private contractors. So I guess we'll have to make sure that the plan does stick to that arrangement. And can we stipulate that?
Well, I can't tell you what to do. I'd like to sometimes, but I can't. You know, I think one of the points Mr. Dukran is making is that this model, this e-commerce, this new way of logistics of distributing goods to people is so new that there's no category in the traffic manuals that really pinpoint this use. And so what we did is we got information from Amazon as to how they intend to use this over a 24-hour period. And that's why I tried to describe that to you, because I knew that'd be the first question: how's this thing going to work? You'll notice that those 70 employees during the night The sorters, I mean, they're vacating the site before the drivers get here. And so the drivers, if there's 100 drivers, 30 will arrive theoretically between, or 33 between 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 33 from 7 to 8, 33, and of course they're leaving as well. So that staggering, I think, drives the numbers down. It doesn't create a big slug of traffic on Amherst Street. In the traditional peak hour, which let's say is 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning, and probably 4:30 to 5:30 in the afternoon. There is some activity there during the day. I didn't think there were 100 employees in the building during the day. I can confirm that with you. I think what you're asking is, does the math here match the numbers in the TIR? And I can find that out with the traffic consultant, but my guess is he's a very thorough and responsible consultant.
And the only point I'm making for everyone's benefit is that the TIR calculations are close to the thresholds. They're not like, just a handful, no, they're close. So should anything change, then you're really hitting that threshold and requirement for full report,
But that's why I said what I said earlier when we're comparing it to essentially an undeveloped site. My client could occupy that building tomorrow without any approvals with somebody, and they could use it as they've used it for many, many, many years. We didn't look at the difference between how it was historically used and how this is used, because that would also reduce the numbers. We just wanted to say, look, it's been vacant for 8 months. We'll just start from ground zero, so. I actually think it's good the way they do it over a 24-hour period, because not everybody's arriving at 8 in the morning, and not everybody's leaving at 5 at night, so.
Well, can I ask a question?
Mr. Rapucci?
Just when you're saying that, it kind of makes me wonder, if everybody isn't there at the same time, why do you need that many spaces? I mean, can't you base it, if you're figuring that you need that number of parking spaces, can't you figure that your traffic flow based on that? I don't know that it because if people are coming and going, sometimes then you don't need that many. If you see what I'm saying?
You're asking, why do churches need so many parking spaces? Well, because on Easter morning, it's busy. You're talking about the non-coincidental peaks between all these staggering of times, and maybe you don't need all the spaces. They've asked us to get 232 parking spaces, and that's really what we're delivering. 100 drivers, 100 vans, and also other employees.
I'm not usually stuck on stuff like this. It just seems like a huge amount of loss or a huge increase in the paved area. It seems like a lot, like much more than we usually consider. And when you were presenting, you said something about the planning department gave you some pushback in that area. What was that about?
Well, the waiver we've requested for end cap islands need to be raised, for every 10 parking spaces.
Right.
I mean, that's a waiver that's readily granted by this board. And so they were saying, geez, there's actually just kind of a lot of asphalt out there. And we said, yeah, okay, we found areas that were painted islands in the front of the building that we could church up with raised and some landscaping, and our client was willing to do that in lieu of those islands. So it was. One other point I forgot to mention, it's in the waiver letter. This site will not be seen by Amherst Street, No, the only people who are going to see this site are the people who go down State Street and actually get to the cul-de-sac. So, yes, we are creating a lot of pavement. We've asked the Zoning Board of Adjustment to grant us that relief, which they have. And part of that was that, yeah, it won't be seen by the general public. The other part was, oddly enough, the zone along Amherst Street is I want to say a GB zone. It's either GB or HB. But the open space requirement in that zone is only 10%. So the abutting zone is right next door. So, yes, sir, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We're paving to meet this tenant's needs. But when you look around at us, we've got beautiful undeveloped land on the other side of the railroad tracks, and we're in the middle of a commercial park, so.
Is it Is my understanding right, though, that there's basically 2 spots for every employee, though?
Yes.
Because there's a company vehicle and a personal vehicle. So if there's 100 employees, there's
200.
200 required spots. Because there's already a car there that, yeah, so.
I get you.
know what I mean?
I think
When they
I think
show up.
it makes sense when it's explained, like, especially where it's a zoning requirement that you got the waiver for, so that kind of, they already decided that.
Alderman Tenton?
Thank you. So one of the next things we're going to talk about is the city's proposed wastewater management plan and some changes to it. And one of the things that came up recently was that, you know, the proposal is for any new redevelopment to, the redevelopment should expand the open space, impervious areas. Here you're asking us to do the opposite, and I understand the reason why you're asking us to do that. Can you talk a little bit about how the porous asphalt, is that going to be similar to the gravel that's there now? Is it, obviously it's less impervious, I would assume?
Well, I actually think it's better than the kind of the packed gravel that's been kind of driven upon and trod upon for 10 years. I've seen, you know, I'm not a huge proponent of it, but it does have its applications. And this is one of the rare instances where it really worked. You know, we did our due diligence. We went out and tested the land to see what the soils were. And we understand where groundwater is and how high it can get. To put in traditional catch basins and then a surface basin or some other treatment practice, we would have not gotten the separation that we would like to see between the bottom of that practice and estimated seasonal high water. I happen to think the porous pavement areas that I've seen have worked remarkably well. It fools the eye because when it rains, it hits and it goes, you know, and it works. But it does need to be maintained, absolutely. So I think in this instance, sir, it is better than the packed gravel. Obviously, in this instance, it's you know, it's a green area right now that we're paving. So clearly, it is not as good, but I think it's the best solution for that area. Yep.
And can I ask, the Amazon coming into this spot, did you say they've been there and it's just a different use that they're gonna be using the building for?
They have occupied this building in the past, yes, sir.
Okay. And so, do they have a long-term lease now in moving forward?
Yes.
They do. Okay. And what's the open space requirement right now for this parcel?
20%.
And you're reducing it down to 10%?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? Any questions for staff during the hearing here? No?
Thank you very
All
much.
right, thanks. All right, so I'm gonna, at this time,
Oh, okay, sorry.
at this time, I'd ask that anybody wishing to speak in opposition or concern to the plan come forward. Anybody wishing to speak in favor of the plan? No? Okay. Having heard none, I'm gonna close the hearing and open our public meeting.
Before you close it,
Okay,
I needed his answer about the trash. He said he was gonna ask.
Well, I don't think he meant right now.
well, I need a motion to open the
Okay,
hearing.
make a motion to reopen the hearing.
Okay, we've got a motion to open the hearing by Mr. Rapucci, a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Weber, okay.
The question was.
Dumpster. You said you were gonna ask, or. you're
I
not
was joking. I was joking that I was going to ask Jerry, but if there's a dumpster, sir, it will be enclosed probably on that northwest corner of the building.
And the other dumpster will be removed.
If there's 2 dumpsters, they'll both be enclosed. All dumpsters shall be enclosed. That's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, at this point, I'll close the hearing and open the meeting. Any comments by anybody? So we, you know, basically a couple parking areas. You know, we talked a little bit about traffic, we talked a little bit about open space. Anybody have any other discussion points they want to talk about before entertaining any motions? No?
No, I
Well, I'm a little bit concerned about what I talked about regarding the trips generated. And I understand the staggering and so on. I understand what Mr. Petrofalo said about what it can do without coming to us.
Yeah.
But because, and I don't know how to, I talked about maybe putting in a condition, but
Yeah, it'd be tough. You'd have to put in a condition that states that if the use becomes inconsistent with the assumed values in the traffic report, then.
Right.
But then, what does that mean? That they're not?
Well,
My
Brian-
guess is if the traffic is an issue here, it's probably gonna impact the actual productivity of the user.
well,
They may have to change the way they're doing it because they're gonna start missing their
So-
deadlines.
so I think it, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair,
Yeah,
say for instance, through these initial calculations,
yeah,
they had exceeded the thresholds, then a full report would have been required.
right.
Which means that they would have to study that intersection that we described before.
Right.
You know, that
With the
opening
cut.
in the median.
Yeah.
Which is a fairly dangerous one.
Yeah.
You know, you're going in there,
Yeah.
you know, you're straddling two speeding lanes,
Yeah.
especially if you're coming with a big truck. And, you know, so, so that's the kind of thing
Right.
that should be addressed, you know, or be concerned about, I would say.
Yeah. Mr. Rapucci?
So if that's if that's a concern, I don't know the answer to this, I'm asking your opinion on it. Could we condition an approval that required revisiting that in 5 years or in 3 years? Can we, because I think what Scott said is, well, if they run into a problem, they're gonna have to do something about it. But if we don't, if there's a traffic problem, it's the city and the state that's gonna end up paying for it if, right? Because any changes down there are gonna have to be done by the city and the state, not the applicant, because we didn't put it in there. Can we condition our approval that traffic gets revisited in 5 years, and if the threshold gets exceeded, then we can require a traffic study? Is that something we can do, or is that beyond what our limits allow us?
I do not know, maybe staff can help us with that, but it sounds like,
I really don't see how we're gonna enforce that in, say, 5 years. I mean, I think if there starts to be problems with traffic, DPW will be notified, planning will be notified, we'll get complaints about it. And at that time, we have to have a conversation with the owners about it.
Okay,
But I really don't think at this time we could really put a condition that they have to come back in 5 years.
it seems like we run into this, though. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no answer, it seems like there's no answer to this question. I always think about that at South Nashua, where the development down at Tara, and we're always talking about the traffic we're adding by putting a building in there. And I'm like, well, didn't we know the ultimate amount of traffic that was gonna be there sooner or later, ahead of time? You know what I mean? It seems like we run into this, but we don't ever find a solution to it. I'm not saying you're not finding a solution, I'm just saying,
That one's had traffic studies, though, you know, it's some.
I'm fine. I don't wanna do that, I just didn't know if it would solve the concern you had.
Yeah.
So I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on that? I don't have any. Okay. Anybody willing to make a motion? Ed?
New business, number 4, site plan, owner 1987 Tamposi Limited Partnership at 10 State Street. Finding the site plan NRO 190, 146D meets. The request for waiver, 190, 184D is granted and will not be contrary to the spirit and intent of the regulation. Number 2, request for waiver, NRO 190, 198, which established minimum parking standard is granted and will not be contrary to the spirit and intent. And 3, as written.
Okay, so we have a motion for new business site plan number 4, that the plan does meet the requirements outlined in NRO 190-146D with the 3 stipulations for Mr. Weber. Do we have a second on that? Second by Mr. Rapucci. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, so next up, other business, case number 1, review of tentative agenda. Everybody had a chance to look at the one in the packet here? You take a minute to look at it? Just a bunch of stuff on here.
Did you look at it?
I did. I won't be here next time, though. I'm going on vacation
Where are you going?
to Alaska.
Going to Alaska.
Exactly.
That's a John Wayne movie.
Came to tech review.
I bet you it's
And I
cooler in
emailed them.
Alaska than it is in this room right now.
It is.
I
Sometimes
my mind.
Alaska's warmer than us.
It's not bad right now. It's like high 50s to mid 60s.
Anybody get through it?
Yes, I read it. Oh,
Okay.
you can look at it.
All right.
Well, is
You wanna make a
your
motion?
opinion
Anything
that
on there?
There's no impact?
You wanna make a motion for that?
Make a motion that Maggie looked at this and doesn't consider there to be any
Well, there's some
regional
interesting
impact.
cases on
All right.
No, I make a motion, there's no regional impact.
All right, we have a motion from Mr. Rapucci that there are no items on the tentative agenda of regional impact. Do you have a second?
Robin's dead.
A second by Mr. Robbins. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Motion passes. All right, other business, case number 2, referral from Board of Aldermen on proposed O-18-015, amending city stormwater management ordinances. Do we have someone who's gonna talk on
Well, I can fill you in a little bit. I'm on the committee.
that? Okay. Fire away.
So, stormwater.
Yeah.
In your packet that was mailed to you, there was an ordinance amending the city's stormwater management ordinances. So, the reason why we're doing this is that we have to be in compliance with the MS4 permit, which is the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems permit issued by the EPA. And this goes into effect on July 1st, 2018, and this is intended to address and reduce the stormwater pollution. So the permit requires that municipalities develop a stormwater management program that controls pollutants from all the MS4 discharge points to the maximum extent practicable. And there are 6 minimum control measures as well as an annual report to the EPA. The changes that we proposed in the ordinance is actually a collaborative effort between engineering, planning, environmental health, and the waterways manager. We've been working together. And in the ordinances, as you can see, there are some proposed changes that we think that are intended to meet the requirements in the MS4 permit. In your folder this evening, you did get an email from, it's actually from Sarah to Scott and I, that the Board of Public Works had an amendment to it, that they wanted to change the goal to reduce the impervious area by a maximum of 20%, where in the ordinance we had proposed 10% to meet the open space requirement. So what we're doing is we're looking for a recommendation from the Planning Board for a favorable recommendation for the ordinances. And I know, Steve knows a lot more about this than I do. And we've been working on it for a very long time. So I don't know if he has any input that he would like to add to it.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the piece that was putting into Public Works operations is that that decreasing of impervious surfaces. And so the Board of Public Works met last week, Thursday, and Commissioner Moriarty is here. So I don't want to speak for him, but I may speak. So if you don't mind, let him,
Sure.
present his discussion.
Come
and
on
then
up. Yeah.
take it from there.
Thank you, Board and staff. Kevin Moriarty, I'm a commissioner on the Board of Public Works. As Mr. Dugrand has said, last week we had a board meeting, May 31st, and this document came before us as an informational item. The board reviewed it and decided to make one change, one amendment. It was a unanimous vote, but since it came before us as an informational item, we're bringing this before you to hopefully make that change. So it would be, as was previously stated, under letter G in the ordinance, redevelopment. It presently states the goal is to reduce impervious area by a minimum of 10% or meet the open space requirement in that zoning district, and we would like to change that to 20%, a minimum of 20%. Why? Well, the city of Nashua is under tremendous stress and pressure from the EPA to decrease our overflow into the waterways. If we don't comply, they will require the city to have full separation of our lines. Right now, the whole city is combined. They will require full separation, and we're estimating well in excess of $500 million for the city to do that. Beyond that, once the lines are separated, that storm water will need to be treated separately, which we do not have the capacity for right now. So the city will need to invest in more physical structure in order to accomplish that, those requirements set by the federal government. So in our minds, at least the board, we were thinking the most economical and ecological way to help prevent this issue is by increasing to 20% the impervious area, so that there is less runoff, less water going into the waterways. Besides that, as you can see on storms throughout the country, how the rivers are backing up, the streams are affected, the wildlife, the habitat. The water's backing up now into the streets, flooding basements, and it's happened here in Nashua as well, and some storms. So that's where we are. The best approach for the city is to increase our green space and to have less impervious structures so that nature will take care of the rainwater slowly the way it should and naturally occur.
So I'm sorry.
Yep, Mr. Rapucci.
So by changing this rule, won't it only affect property that is being developed somehow? I mean, 99% of Nashua isn't going anywhere. It's already done, right?
It's got redevelopment, so, yeah. Redevelopment.
That's what David was saying earlier about our last case, that's actually an example.
That was a
where-
perfect
know how-
example, actually, that last case.
But percentage-wise, realistically, how much of redevelopment, like what percentage changes? If we go from 10 to 20%, obviously, that's double the amount we're requiring. But how much of an actual impact would it have with such a small amount of the physical property in Nashua being developed or redeveloped? I mean, even though it's redevelopment, it's still a minute quantity of land in the city, right? Or am I wrong about that?
I mean, I don't have the answer to that.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I'm
No,
just saying.
the city engineer may know more about the numbers, but we're trying to comply with the EPA. Any positive steps, they look favorable to us.
So who gave us
We've been fined before, and we're trying to avoid more fines.
So who came up with the 10% number? Where did that come from?
That was the alderman. I don't That was
That
the
was,
ordinance.
that was a proposal which came through the committee.
From the committee.
From the committee. So-
Currently, there is no amount listed in the ordinance, and we came up with, we went back and forth, and we came up as a group, the 10%.
So what does the committee think about changing that from 10% to 20%? Like, what's the downside of doing that? What's the impact?
We actually have a meeting tomorrow.
I would be inclined to say that's the question. If the people who decided 10% was okay, and the Board of Public Works wants to say 20%, I mean, I know nothing about this. My opinion, you might as well ask my dog. I mean, I don't have information to make a decision on. But if one group said 10% is okay, and the Public Works Department is saying we really should set it at 20, I think we should understand the impact of that change before we decide that it's a good idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just want to be clear what it actually is, right, is there's a current green, we'll call it open space requirement for a particular parcel that in a certain zone,
Correct.
right? That's not changing. What's changing is when you redevelop, you need to be 20% better than you are, or what's being recommended, 20% better than you are, or compliant with the
Zoning.
existing open space. Is that right?
Right, right.
Am I reading it right?
Right now, the ordinance reads that
Okay.
redevelopment of previously developed sites must meet the stormwater management standards to the maximum extent possible, as, to be determined by the planning board. That's how the ordinance reads presently. And then our recommendation was to have it read that, it's still gonna say to the maximum extent possible. And the goal is to reduce impervious area by a minimum of 10%, and then the Board of Public Works had recommended 20%.
But it's just a goal too? It's not like a requirement. It doesn't even sound like, so.
It's, as I said, it's the goal, right? They wouldn't, if
So
the
it's
planning
not gonna
board,
change any kind of ordinance requirement for zoning? It wouldn't change
No.
what somebody has to
No.
do?
No.
And what does it do? I'm not trying to be a wise guy, but if it's not changing any of the requirements for people that are redeveloping in the city, then what does it accomplish?
well, it's to help to reduce the amount of pollution going into our stormwater. We're looking for more, green space. This is the recommendation. I know Alderwoman she might have some more, did you want to add to it?
You just gotta step, yeah, you can step up there.
Good evening. Alderwoman Melizzi Golia from Ward 8, and I chair PEDC, which is where this ordinance came. And last night we tabled it because we're waiting for your recommendation and any proposed language that you may have in addition to the proposed language that came from the Board of Public Works. But last night at our meeting, Mr. Dukran was there, Amy Gill was there from the Board of, from Public Works, and then Director Marchant from Community Development was there. And the committee agreed that we would wait to make any amendments until we got any feedback from the planning board regarding the proposed language changes, as well as any other proposed language changes you would have. But we did have discussion regarding this proposed change, and there was no objection voiced from Director Marchant or obviously from Mr. Dukran or Amy Gill. So we, as a committee, said we're all fine with it. Again, there were questions to Director Marchant, and there was no objection from the community development side. And as you heard, this was discussed, and all of this was worked on by a group of people across many different offices here in the city. So we're bringing it to you, but I do want you to know that Director Marchant was there last night, as well as people from the Board of Public Works, and there were no concerns or objections raised regarding the language. And Alderman Tenza was also there last night and was part of that discussion. And
was Tuesday.
Or Tuesday, yes. So, and I don't know if Alderman Tenza has anything else he would like to add, but what you're hearing is language, again, that was proposed by the Board of Public Works. Alderman Jettie brought it to us, and before putting that language together to make any amendments to this piece of legislation, we wanted to get your feedback. I don't know if that was helpful or if it made it more muddled, but
I think the only kind of question that's in my mind is that it's sort of like the way it's written here, it's sort of, and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's looking for, in a redevelopment, and this is specific to G, the developed site must meet the stormwater management standards to the maximum extent possible. But it says to be determined by us. Like we're the ones that are actually making the decision whether they made the maximum extent practical. I mean, I'm an engineer, that doesn't scare me that much, but I'd be interested to hear from the folks that are not, whether you feel like that's undue. I mean, how are you gonna judge that?
That's my feeling. I don't feel qualified to judge that. The way I'll judge it is I'll listen to the people who know. Steve says something, I'll say, okay, you know, if that's the way it is, because I don't know anything about it.
Ed?
Just a little input. One of our, and not to single out, one of the people that come in here all the time and add parking lot after parking lot after parking lot, Southern New Hampshire.
You singled them out.
Okay, well, it's a good example because that's a lot of impervious. And what is that going to affect them? That's my question. How will this impact them the next time they come up? Simple. Okay?
Well, it's up to us.
No, I'm saying,
This ordinance says it's up to us.
yeah,
to
but
figure that out.
how is that going to affect? Are they going to be able to put another, when they need to, when they need to? Now, will this stop them from being able to do that? So,
The way I read this, it is, if we say so, then yeah.
okay, so that's why,
I read it.
that's why I'm bringing
Whatever
it
we
forward,
say.
because that's, you know, Southern New Hampshire needs parking lots, and so, and I've asked them for, instead of a parking lot, put up a parking, like they do have a parking
The structure.
structure, so that they can, in one area, they have more. So, but my question is simple. This may impact them where that stops them from progressing and being a more provider for this city. So that's my question. How will it impact them?
I don't know, I mean, I think it's a land, I mean, basically, I get that it's a land use issue, and it makes sense to me that a land use issue should
Yeah.
come to
Oh, yeah,
us
yeah,
with, are we trying to get more open space or not, yes or no? It does indicate that applications now have to include a PE certified, or certification to compliance with the standard. So to some extent, I think what we should, reading this, I'm assuming we're gonna see a certification saying stormwater management standards have been implemented to the maximum extent possible, and someone's gonna stamp it and say it, and then our role generally is to make sure that has happened, more so than.
Well, I'm in favor of this
Right,
entirely.
But I'm not totally sure that this wording here, to be determined by the planning board, is appropriate where it is in the paragraph. I think if it were at the end of the last sentence, where it said the application shall include certification by a registered professional engineer as to compliance with this standard and reviewed by the planning board or something, that would make more sense to me. But the way it's written right now, it says redevelopment must meet stormwater management standards to the maximum extent possible to be determined by the planning board. So it's just like that, we're either determining that it has
Maximum.
met the maximum extent,
Yeah.
or we're determining that someone has determined that it has, and we're looking to make sure it got done. I would vote for the latter.
Yes.
You know, moving our determination to, yes, we've determined that an engineer has looked at that and has made the calculations and has certified the compliance, and then we review that that procedure has been done, not that the actual maximum extent has been reached. Steve, what's your thoughts on that?
All right, so,
Yeah.
so Mr. Chair, let me give some more dimension to this discussion.
Yeah,
First, I would say, I would offer that I think this needs more work, especially in respect to giving this governing body the teeth to enforce, to implement, what have you. Like Linda mentioned, this started with the MS4 permit that a lot of communities in New Hampshire trying to put together because they got it's the effective date of the permit is coming July this year. And the discussion started with 20%, and it through the collaborative effort ended up with 10% open space. And obviously, it's a land use criteria that's being used. The ordinance, the draft ordinance was prepared and, sent to the board. And then on May, I think it was 20-something, the EPA visited us, the Public Works. And like Commissioner Moriarty talked about, they want this zero discharges on CSOs,
right.
meaning lots of money.
Yeah.
We have to come up with to fund the project. And if we understand what that really, what we're trying to achieve from Public Works, so we're saying it's more than the MS4 permit now. It's about CSOs.
Sure.
MS4 permit is about stormwater discharges. CSO is about combined sewage discharges,
Right.
which we have so many outlets, on the Nashua River and the Merrimack River, and the EPA is not satisfied with the program we've done so far, where we spent in excess of $100 million through some separation and through storage and treating facilities that we've done, like over on Bridge Street
Right,
and other
right.
places. And so we are looking to see how can we achieve these goals. Now, if you look at what CSO discharges are and what stormwater discharges are that cause overtopping of brooks and streams and so on, it is related to what we call peak flows,
Yep,
right? It's not,
not day to day,
well,
yeah.
it happens when
Certain times.
your system becomes charged with a peak discharge, and it's not a continuous discharge. It's I wouldn't say it's instantaneous, but like CSO problems in the city are usually a 20-minute thing.
Right,
It comes, it swells up, 20 minutes later, it goes down, but it leaves disastrous effects, results.
yeah,
So you talk about peak flows.
right.
And the question is, how do you control those peak flows? We see plans all the time, detention ponds,
Right.
underground storage, that kind of thing. So with Public Works, we are really concerned about the stormwater. Again, the open space is a land use criteria for various benefits. If we can do both, get the land use, green space, and get the stormwater controlled, to reduce the CSOs, and to reduce what's happening in our brooks and streams and flooding of people's properties and so on, then I think we're all better off.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm thinking this needs work. So since the EPA came, it kind of and they in fact encouraged us, can you find alternative methods
Right,
to help with this? And there are. So we started examining what other people are doing, and I think I have a document here that we started reading, and it's from, I think, the Seacoast. And they're looking at, yes, you have a green space criteria, and maybe the 10% will work for green space, but if we put additional conditions on managing the stormwater. Tonight we saw porous pavement, that's one method.
right.
right? So there are a lot of other methods, promote infiltration and so on. I think we can get to the same results. And that's why I'm asking that we look at this deeper and give options to the applicant to, when they come in, because there will be locations where they simply can't do anything with achieving the open space, but they can do
It could
something
be
with the
storage or
stormwater.
something, yeah.
Yeah.
But isn't this kind of saying that, Steve? I mean, it has, they're both in one sentence here, which kind of conflates it a little bit, but, you know, it's got redevelopment must meet stormwater management standards to the maximum extent possible.
Wow, that needs to be defined.
Yeah,
Yeah, never leave that open like that.
this is a little open, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's the storage,
Yeah.
everything.
And nobody, actually, I've been on this board for so many years now, nobody has attempted to do that.
Yeah.
Nobody has.
But do you think that that could be improved to include, you know, a certain a certain amount of discharge and a certain
Right.
type of storm?
I think
Like
we
put
can find,
numbers on it, like,
we can find that. We can find
Yeah.
percentages, we can relate it to certain storms.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
storms that you really want to control. I tell you, for instance, our CSO program that we completed,
Yeah,
not according to the EPA, but according to the arrangement, the agreement we have with them, the maximum storm is a 2-year actual storm, right? So your average storm, you know, that you see during the year, you don't see anything,
yeah,
you know, but you get a 5-year storm, and then you get CSOs.
right.
So we have to look at a storm where, on average, you wouldn't get the discharges, and, you know, then we don't have to invest in $500 million.
Right.
Um,
So would your recommendation be that, you know, in particular with regard to the redevelopment work and the requirements of the applicants in dealing with stormwater and runoff, that there be more specific language in here with respect to, you know, the type of storm analyzed, the volume of the discharge, you know, the standard kind of,
Yeah, and I apologize for dropping this on the
Yeah.
Alderwoman and Commissioner, but as we look at this further, this is what we are seeing, and this is the better way of dealing with it.
And I'm going to turn to you. I have no history as to what this working group did and
Right.
whether they considered more specific numbers or not. I know the conversations I've been involved in have talked about redevelopment, as we all know, has its own unique set of characteristics.
right,
And as I looked at this, I thought, well, this is giving you, as a planning board, as well as our whole planning department working with an applicant, kind of that flexibility to say, okay, we think you're as close as you can be. Or maybe they're going to come in, like the person who came in with the sidewalks at a previous meeting, and so we're going to give you money. And they're going to say, well, look, we figured out how we can meet more than 20%. But I don't have that history with what the working group did, so I don't know what kind of consideration went into these numbers. I just know that the conversation I was involved in talked about there needs to be some flexibility in looking at redevelopment. And so certainly by the time something got to you, it's been certified, it's gone through our planning department, and then we've got our experts here
right.
to kind of, do what I heard you doing today with the McDonald's application. Well, yeah, you came back, but we think maybe there's something else you can do. Can you go back and look at it, even though they had an engineer and they had all sorts of people put that plan together? I mean, I don't think that part, from my mind, is that much different. You get things certified all the time and say, we don't think that makes sense, come back.
Right.
But I think maybe you have you can offer some insight into that process that went on to get to this document.
Yeah, we've been I've been part of this group for months, and I know it's been going on longer than that. We looked at ordinances from other communities. We looked at other ones in the surrounding area. We went back and forth with changes to the ordinance. right now, as it stands, in a lot of this redevelopment, people will send in stormwater letters, and it'll get reviewed by engineering and what their proposed changes are, and it's to the maximum extent possible. Gets reviewed, if we don't think that that's enough, we'll go back and forth with them and try to get them to improve it. But ultimately, it will get approved by the planning board, or not, or if you have questions. And as it is right now, it's just to the maximum extent possible. That's how it is now, and you review them. The point of this was to have a goal and have a number. We were looking not to be too restrictive, but something that is enough, that we do want them to meet a goal. That's kind of how the process has been. And like I said, right now, you do approve this if it's to the maximum extent possible, but we do. We go back and forth with them, and engineering will have comments on it. I know we've looked at a lot of ordinances. These are taking what we currently have, and you can see all the things that are underlined are things that we've added, things that are crossed out, we're modifying a little bit. But we can certainly, make changes if you wanted to send a favorable recommendation with those, or if you have other proposed changes as well.
Yeah.
And again, this got tabled just to kind of keep the timelines in place. It needs to be approved prior to July 1.
July 1st.
So we have till July 1. We tabled it. So we will be reviewing it at the PEDC meeting on June 19th. So, which means it will then go to the Board of Aldermen on June 26th for final approval to make that July 1 deadline. I'm not saying we can't manage proposed language. If there are things you would like to have us think about, one of the things that Ms. Lovering, our legislative assistant, just commented to me on as we started talking about the proposals that came from the Board of Public Works is we need to be cognizant of whether or not something will trigger the need for another public hearing, if the changes are great enough that we need to have another public hearing. And again, I'm not saying we can't do things. I just kind of want to make you aware of what the other moving pieces are that I've been made aware of. That being said, there's certainly no reason we can't go back and further amend this after having more information to see what's reasonable.
True. Yeah.
Because I think at this point, Board of Public Works would probably want to weigh in on more specific language, and I would imagine that the Planning Board and everyone who's been involved in putting this together would also want to weigh in on more specific language. So it may be that we regroup and then propose something after further study and information has been able to be gathered.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally have an issue with putting in the 10 or the 20%. I just think that the literally, it's just the sentence structure is kind of off. It needs to have the to be determined by the planning board at the end of the, you've got us looking at the development, that we have to meet the stormwater management. It says sites must meet stormwater management to maximum extent. That was what was there. And that's our intent, our duty to ensure that that's been done. But then the goal of reducing the impervious area, it's outside of that, you know what I'm saying? It's not. So this is kind of an administrative editorial thing, but I think you gotta move the to be determined by the planning board to the end of the paragraph so that both of those are in our purview. Because only one is actually in there, the way it's just a wording thing.
So,
that seems pretty simple.
So I think the big question is, are you comfortable with the change to 20%?
Yeah.
And if you're comfortable with that, then maybe PEDC can wordsmith it?
Yeah, I mean, we do that all the time.
With your input, but I think the bigger question was, how do you feel about the whole amended ordinance? And then your reaction to the language that was being proposed also, the proposed changes coming out of Board of Public Works. So,
Great.
and we'll spend an evening wordsmithing, and you can sit at home and watch us.
Mr. Rapucci?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to say no to people on this board. It's hard to say no. It's hard to tell somebody that you have to change your plan and spend 50 grand and have less of something on a whim, on a vague opinion. I think our board, and maybe, I'm just speaking for myself, but I think one thing that we don't do very well as a total government, not our board or anybody else's, we've got to be prepared to spend some small money. If we have a project that comes before us, I have a vote, but I don't have the skill to know if that's to the best extent possible. I don't know that. My voice matters, but I don't have the ability to form my own judgment. I have to listen to other people. Maybe our board has to hire people to do that. Or maybe we have to require applicants to, here's your goal, you have to hit 20%, you have to convince us that you've done everything you can to do that, and maybe we need to hire a professional to make sure that that happens, rather than just put it on the planning board, because I'm not speaking for my peers, but I'm not sure that we could do that. You know what I mean? I'm really not.
That, part of that is why the city engineer is a position on the board, right? I mean,
Well,
just to give that input, yeah.
that's true,
Yeah.
but then what we're really doing is we're just doing what the city engineer guides us to do, if that's the way we do it, which is okay. But we're making a decision that
Yeah,
I
I mean,
don't feel like I
this
have
change
information.
does have it being certified and,
Right.
you know.
I registered.
They're gonna have a registered engineer do this, and then and they're gonna engineer it.
That works for them.
Yeah, but once it's there, it
Yeah.
goes before the engineering department, and they know whether it's
Yeah, I mean, the city
there or not.
engineer is our engineer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Practical purposes.
So if I could just say, I mean, the language about the certification from the engineer is already in the statute.
Right.
And I think, so that's being done, it just might not get to us, it might be done before it gets to us
It is.
at the planning board.
Oh,
Oh, it does. I mean, we got the.
I'm not trying to belabor the point, but I can't talk about a case that is presently before us or was recently before us. But let's say a hypothetical applicant comes to us and says, you know what, we need a boatload of parking, we just gotta pave everything, okay? Hypothetically. So what exactly are we gonna do? There's an engineer standing there saying, this is what my client needs. And based on what my client needs, this is the best we can do.
They use the pervious stuff that was used tonight, the porous.
But what I'm saying, all I'm trying to say is, when you have something that vague, that,
I think putting the percentage in here does help, though. That actually
Gives us a
helps
goal.
this.
Yeah.
So, and I'll just,
It does, I mean, I don't think this amended language makes it worse, actually. It probably improves it.
okay.
But the 10 versus 20 is a little bit different, because that's a significant amount of,
and I'll just
going
put,
into it, people are gonna know, it's not,
and part of this might just be education, because in the statute now also, there are stormwater management measures, it references a number of best practices.
Yeah.
And so, maybe Mr. Duker knows about those, what those are, but certainly, I rely on the planning staff to make those decisions. One question I have, which I'm still not 100% clear on, is if the stormwater management guidelines are related to the open space guidelines for each parcel of land or each zone. So if
open
the.
space gives you,
Mhm.
it's one way of getting,
Right.
of management.
So if you,
Pervious open space.
hypothetically, if it's 20% for a certain zone, is our guideline then to say that's enough?
Well, Steve, your concern is they could do it another way. Instead of having the 10% open space, they could just have more underground storage and catch basins and stuff. That could give you the same effect as.
Stormwater control.
As more open space, you know, so.
I mean, there are certainly benefits for open space, there's benefits for,
Yeah.
for vegetative covers. You know, you've heard me before, and we had it in a recent case, waivers for the median islands and
Yeah.
parking lots. I mean, it's not just about having vegetation, but
Yeah.
where you have the vegetation, talking about seas of pavement being heat sinks, you know.
Right.
That's really what that was put in place for, but
Right.
we give the waiver all the time. People complain about the maintenance issues with the, you know, with having the bays that way. But, well, I think we have to understand where we are as a city when it comes to imperviousness. A rule of thumb is if your average impervious cover starts approaching 10%, then you start seeing impairments on your waterways. I don't know if you all know what our average is today, and talk about the entire city, all 33 square miles,
Yeah.
with parts of the rivers included,
Yeah.
and so on. We are at over 16%
That's what we're up there.
impervious cover. So we already, as a whole city, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Then you look at the inner city, and the piece that really is a problem for us with the combined
That's where the
sewer
combined
problem,
sewer
that's where the
is.
combined sewer. You're probably in excess of 50, 60%.
Yeah.
And if you were to take a calculation, say 40%,
Yeah.
being on the conservative side, and you have to get to 10%,
Yeah.
right? So 40% to 10%, that's a 75% reduction in your imperviousness.
That's a lot.
So if somebody's asking, where did you get a 10% or 20%? Well, we picked something that was reasonable, 20%, you know? Because trying to get 75% in the
Right.
inner city is not practical.
No.
But, so that's what the number is. So we do have a problem, and it's about stormwater. It's about discharging cleaner stormwater. And we let the permits, we always do this in all municipalities do this. We let the permits drive our decisions. We let the EPIC come down. I think it should be a goal of the city to have clean water bodies, fishable, swimmable, that kind of thing, you know?
Right.
So, but we're letting the permit drive us,
But
so.
if I'm reading this right, though, this is, let's say you got a 100,000 square foot parcel here, and it's 50,000 square feet of impervious. This is only, if you left it without the 20%, it's saying you only need to get it to 40, not you need to get it to 10.
Right.
You need to reduce
Just
it by
the-
10,
yes.
not, so we're not saying, like, if the like you said, if the parcels are already 50% impervious, we're not saying you gotta go from 50 to 10. We're saying you gotta go 50 to 40.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the
Reduce
amount of
10%,
reduction.
Right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it probably even should be a little bit more worded, because it's, right now, actually, the way it's probably read, that 50 only needs to go to 45, because it's 10% of the impervious, not.
And let me
10%
tell
of the
you,
total.
let me
So
tell you
so we
why,
probably need to clear that up.
let me tell you why this maximum extent
Yeah,
practical hasn't worked.
yeah,
Truly, the ordinance talks about runoff for pre-development must equal runoff for
yeah, you can't
post-development.
increase it, right?
Right? So you come with 100% impervious, you don't have to do anything.
Right,
And they tell you that. They tell, oh,
because
the
you're
law doesn't require
you're
it.
full runoff,
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's why we don't make any progress in this area. And for
But if we
years,
had,
it's been
if
like-
we had this, then we'd have to come down to 90%.
That's correct.
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think you just gotta, you do have to clean up the language of what's the baseline you're comparing the 10% to. Is it reduce the impervious 10% or reduce the entire site by 10%? I mean, if the intent here is just to reduce the impervious
Surface area.
10%, that's a smaller even
Right.
which is fine, I just,
Or they just have to meet the open space.
or meet
meet the
the
open
actual open space, yeah, which is gonna be way higher most of the time. So, so if we got an issue, 20%'s all right with me then, too.
Fine with me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's good to have the background that this is, like, a lot of times we have the traffic issue, we're just adding another car, is that gonna cause a big issue? But it sounds like we're way over the issue already, so we need to move back to a real baseline that's manageable.
This is,
Yeah.
this is a problem that we inherited from the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what it is.
Okay.
That work that should have been done that wasn't.
Anybody comfortable making a motion? Again, in these, we make a motion for a favorable recommendation or an unfavorable with any kind of condition, so.
I'll make a motion for a favorable recommendation to return this to the Board of Aldermen.
Okay, so we have a motion by Alderman Tenza for O-18-015 in front of us with a favorable recommendation, and that includes the modification of section 190-215G, changing the 10% to 20%.
Did you want it on the language at the end where you wanted to have that moved? Is that?
Well, I think, that's probably.
With some minor
With minor,
clarifications to the language?
yeah, do you want to just add that to your motion, minor clarifications of the language and consistent with our discussions or something? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So second on that?
Second.
Second by Mr. Weber. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Okay. All right, we are, I believe, at the end, unless anybody, discussion items? Jerry, did you have a discussion item you wanted to go over?
Not necessarily, not unless everybody's got a
We
little
just
bit
have
of
one more
information.
discussion item right at the end, and I wanted to, I'm actually signed up for this, the round table. We had a lot of different discussions.
Okay.
And it's this coming Monday.
Yeah.
And so, like, Jerry has, this is someplace
one?
where it's not, yeah.
Where is that located?
It's up, I think, exit 11. It's gonna be 9 Executive Drive.
9
at the
Executive Drive, yes.
Nashua Regional Planning Commission offices. They have really nice offices, like nice round table. What the importance of this is you're finding out what the other cities have, and maybe they have an answer to our problem, or you can discuss that and get some ideas and input from them, and you can bring forth answers that they might have.
Okay.
So it's a good discussion. It's not something that we had Steve here at our workshop. This is where you have a round table and you can discuss problems with other planning board people. And it's free. I don't know if they're gonna feed you, though. I don't think
I
so.
don't know.
That's a problem.
Is that what matters?
Yeah, wait a minute.
Okay.
Well, all the other ones, they feed you really good.
Anybody else? Jerry?
I'll just ask everybody
Yeah.
if they will take the time to read the stuff that I sent,
I reread it.
Absolutely.
and we can talk about it. This is not a good night to talk about it. Everybody's kind of done. So I'll just say that and just leave it like,
Yeah.
Can we
Leave it
discuss
like
it
that.
at the next meeting?
I'll discuss it anytime. I just,
Yeah.
I'm looking around and everybody looks like I feel, which is, let's get out of here.
Okay,
So, but it's not anything that can't wait.
all
We
right.
also do that at the round table.
There you go. Plug in. Anybody want to make a motion to
I'll
adjourn?
make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned at 10:16.